Deep within the heart of Vatican City, behind walls that have witnessed 2 millennia of human history, lie secrets that could reshape our understanding of faith, power, and truth itself. In climate-controlled vaults and forgotten chambers, documents rest in silence, some waiting patiently for their 75-year embargo to expire, others destined to remain forever sealed from mortal eyes. What truths do these ancient stones and sacred halls conceal? What shadows lurk behind the world's most powerful religious institution? 1. The Forbidden Archives. In the depths of Vatican City, beneath the splendor of St. Peter's Basilica and the artistic grandeur of the Sistine Chapel, stretches a labyrinthine world that few mortals will ever glimpse. Here, in climate-controlled chambers and reinforced concrete bunkers, lies one of humanity's most jealously guarded treasure troves. The Vatican Apostolic Archives, formerly known by the more ominous name that sent chills down the spines of conspiracy theorists worldwide, the Vatican Secret Archives. 53 miles of shelving wind through underground chambers, housing 35,000 volumes of catalogs spanning 12 centuries of human history. To put this staggering collection into perspective, if you were to read just 1 document per day, it would take you over 300 years to examine even a fraction of what lies within these forbidden halls. The archives contain everything from Napoleon's sacking of the Vatican in 1810 to the Galileo affair, preserving humanity's most pivotal moments in their rawest, unfiltered form. But why were these archives shrouded in such secrecy for so long? The answer lies not in the Vatican's desire for concealment, but in a linguistic misunderstanding that has fueled centuries of speculation. The word secretum in Latin means personal or private, rather than secret in the modern sense. These were simply the personal archives of the Pope. Yet this semantic confusion created an aura of mystery that proved impossible to dispel, even after Pope Francis officially renamed them the Vatican Apostolic Archives in 2019. Pope Leo XIII first opened the archives to scholars in 1881, after they had been used exclusively to serve the Pope and preserve documentation dating from the 8th century. But even today, access remains tantalizingly restricted. Researchers must navigate a Byzantine approval process, demonstrating not only their academic credentials but also their adequate knowledge of archival research. Most crucially, access is granted no earlier than 75 years after the close of a pope's reign, ensuring that the most sensitive contemporary documents remain forever beyond reach. What treasures have scholars discovered within these hallowed halls? The collection reads like a greatest hits of human drama and divine intervention. Among the most famous holdings is a letter from Mary, Queen of Scots, written while awaiting her execution, pleading with Pope Sixtus V for intervention. The desperation in her words, preserved in fading ink, offers an intimate glimpse into the final moments of one of history's most tragic figures. Even more historically significant is the 1521 papal bull Decet Romanum Pontificum, documenting the Catholic Church's excommunication of Martin Luther. This single document literally changed the course of world history, setting in motion the Protestant Reformation that would reshape Christianity forever. Had this excommunication not occurred, the religious landscape of Europe, and indeed the world, might look entirely different today. The archives also contain correspondence showing how documents survived Napoleon's ransacking in 1810, when the French emperor seized the Vatican archives and carted them off to Paris. One particularly precious document, a 1530 letter signed by 85 English nobles requesting Pope Clement VII grant Henry VIII divorce, survived only because the chief archivist rolled it up and hid it inside a secret drawer in a chair, where the French never found it. But what makes the Vatican archives truly extraordinary is not just what they contain, but what they might still be hiding. Despite developing policies that restrict access to material by pontificate, popes have occasionally granted exceptions. Pope Paul VI made the records of the Second Vatican Council available shortly after it ended, while Pope John Paul II allowed scholars access to documents about the Holy See's relations with Nazi Germany during Pius XI pontificate. These exceptions only fuel speculation about what other documents might warrant special protection. The physical security surrounding these archives rivals that of any intelligence agency. Visitors must navigate multiple checkpoints and are monitored by closed-circuit television from the prefect's office. The archives themselves are housed in a 2-story, fireproof, reinforced concrete bunker with climate-controlled conditions designed to preserve parchment and paper for millennia. Unlike popular imagination suggests, there are no torchlit underground passages. The archives rest in what are essentially high-tech warehouses where every environmental factor is meticulously controlled. The archives also house documentation from Vatican embassies around the globe, as well as specific collections from aristocratic families and religious orders. This global network of information gathering has made the Vatican one of the world's most informed institutions about international affairs. Diplomatic correspondence spanning centuries provides unparalleled insights into the machinations of European politics, colonial expansion, and the rise and fall of empires. Yet perhaps the most tantalizing aspect of the Vatican archives is what remains classified. Parts of the archive do remain classified in the modern sense of the word secret. Most of these materials relate to contemporary personalities and activities. What contemporary figures might warrant such protection? Which modern political scandals or religious controversies are deemed too sensitive for public consumption? One study from 1969 described the archive's cataloging system as so inadequate that it remained an extensive buried city, a Herculaneum inundated by the lava of time. Secret as an archaeological dig is secret. While cataloging has improved dramatically since then, this observation raises a troubling possibility. How many historically significant documents remain undiscovered simply because they've been misfiled or incorrectly cataloged? The Vatican's approach to scholarly access reveals a careful balancing act between transparency and protection. Researchers request permission to visit and then request specific documents to review in dedicated reading rooms. This system prevents browsing or accidental discoveries while ensuring that legitimate scholars can access materials relevant to their research. But it also means that the Vatican maintains tight control over which secrets see the light of day and when. The procedure for accessing the archives is almost identical to that of the British Library or Library of Congress, with stringent initial security but reasonable entry requirements for qualified researchers. Yet the Vatican's unique status as both a religious institution and sovereign state adds layers of complexity to any research conducted within its walls. As we stand on the threshold of an increasingly digital age, the Vatican has begun selectively digitizing portions of its collection. But this raises new questions. Which documents are being prioritized for digital preservation? Are sensitive materials being deliberately excluded from digitization efforts? And in an era where a single data breach can expose millions of documents, how does the Vatican balance accessibility with security? The Vatican archives represent more than just a repository of historical documents. They are a window into the soul of one of humanity's most enduring institutions. Every papal decree, every diplomatic correspondence, every carefully preserved letter tells a story not just of the Catholic Church, but of human civilization itself. Yet the very restrictions that have preserved these documents for centuries also ensure that the Vatican's deepest secrets may remain hidden for generations to come. What other revelations await discovery in those 53 miles of shelving? What truths about power, faith, and human nature lie waiting in documents that won't be accessible until the next century? The Vatican archives remind us that history is never complete. It is always being written, always being reinterpreted, and always holding back its most profound secrets for those patient enough to wait for their revelation. 2. The Pope's Silent War. Among the millions of documents resting in those 53 miles of Vatican shelving, perhaps none have generated more controversy, more heated debate, or more desperate demands for transparency than the files relating to one man, Pope Pius XII. For over 7 decades, these particular archives remain sealed, their contents the subject of intense speculation, academic warfare, and diplomatic pressure from governments around the world. What secrets about the Catholic Church's role during humanity's darkest hour were deemed too sensitive for public consumption? The answer would finally emerge in March 2020, when the Vatican's most closely guarded 20th century documents were at last opened to scholars, revealing a story more complex and morally ambiguous than anyone had imagined. After decades of pressure from historians and Jewish groups, the Vatican on March 2, 2020, began allowing scholars access to the archives of Pope Pius XII, the controversial World War II-era pontiff whose papacy lasted from 1939 to 1958. The timing was significant. Exactly 75 years after the end of World War II in Europe, adhering to the Vatican's strict policy of keeping papal documents sealed until nearly a century after the events they describe. Yet the release of these archives would raise more questions than it answered, painting a portrait of a pope caught between impossible choices and revealing the Vatican's wartime priorities in stark, uncomfortable detail. The central controversy surrounding Pope Pius XII, born Eugenio Pacelli, had simmered for decades. Why did the Pope who led the Catholic Church through the Holocaust remain publicly silent about the systematic extermination of European Jewry? Roman Catholic Church officials have always insisted that Pope Pius XII did everything possible to save Jewish lives, but he remained publicly silent while some 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust. Critics labeled him Hitler's Pope, while defenders argued he worked quietly behind the scenes to save lives, constrained by the fear that public condemnation would only make Nazi retaliation more severe. When the archives finally opened, researchers discovered something that would fundamentally alter our understanding of this period. A series of secret meetings between Pius XII and a personal envoy of Hitler, Prince Philip von Hessen, that began shortly after Pius was elected Pope and continued for 2 years. The great-grandson of Queen Victoria of England, this Nazi prince was married to the daughter of the King of Italy and would shuttle back and forth between Hitler and the Pope, engaged in secret negotiations that were unknown even to high-ranking Vatican officials at the time. This revelation was staggering. For decades, historians had debated the extent of Vatican-Nazi communication, but the existence of a direct, secret channel between the Pope and the Führer had remained hidden in the deepest recesses of the Vatican archives. The secret channel gave Pius a direct line to Hitler that was previously unknown, even to high-ranking Vatican officials at the time. What was discussed in these clandestine meetings? What agreements, if any, were reached? The documents suggest a pope desperately trying to protect the Church's interests while navigating the treacherous political landscape of wartime Europe. The fact is, Pius XII was afraid, certainly in the first years of the war, that the Nazis were going to win. And so he felt he had to plan for a Europe that was going to be under Nazi control with their pal Mussolini helping out. This fear shaped Vatican policy throughout the early war years, as church officials calculated that antagonizing the Nazis publicly might result in even greater persecution of Catholics and Jews across occupied Europe. Perhaps the most damning revelation came in the form of a letter that had languished in the Vatican archives for over 80 years. Correspondence dated December 14, 1942, from German Jesuit priest Lothar Koenig to Pius XII's secretary, described how up to 6,000 Jews and Poles were being gassed each day in German-occupied Poland. This wasn't vague intelligence or rumor. It was detailed, specific information from a trusted source within the German Catholic resistance. The letter from the priest was significant because it represented detailed correspondence about the Nazi extermination of Jews, including in ovens, from an informed church source in Germany. The timing of this letter makes it particularly significant. While it can't be certain that Pius saw the letter, Father Lieber was Pius's top aide and had served the Pope when he was the Vatican's ambassador to Germany during the 1920s, suggesting a close working relationship especially concerning matters related to Germany. This means that by December 1942, the Vatican had access to precise, detailed information about the Holocaust, information that came from within the Nazi system itself. Yet even with this knowledge, the Pope's public response remained unchanged. According to The Pope at War, by Pulitzer Prize-winning anthropologist David Kurtzer, a top Secretariat of State official told the British envoy to the Vatican in mid-December 1942 that the Pope couldn't speak out about Nazi atrocities because the Vatican hadn't been able to verify the information. This claim becomes deeply problematic when viewed alongside the detailed intelligence the Vatican was receiving from its own sources. The newly released documents also shed light on the Vatican's priorities during one of the war's most tragic episodes. On October 16, 1943, the SS had lists of all the Jews in Rome, went door to door and tried to arrest all of Rome's Jews, thousands of them. They found about 1,260, arrested them, and brought them to a military college just outside the walls of the Vatican. The roundup occurred, as one Nazi official reported to Hitler, under the Pope's very windows. What the newly unearthed documents revealed was that the Vatican worked very hard to show that some of the arrested Jews had been baptized and therefore shouldn't be considered Jews, from the Church's point of view, and therefore should be released. The lives the Vatican worked hardest to save were Jews who had converted to Catholicism or were children of Catholic Jewish mixed marriages. This selective intervention reveals a disturbing hierarchy in Vatican thinking. Catholic converts were worth saving, while other Jews were apparently expendable. The documents also revealed the anti-Semitic attitudes that persisted within the Vatican hierarchy. The second document that historian David Kurtzer found was Monsignor Angelo Dell'Acqua's thoroughly anti-Semitic document explaining why he thought the Pope should not speak out. The prelate thought it would be too embarrassing to protest anti-Semitic measures when, over many centuries, ruling popes had confined Jews to ghettos and had forbidden them from practicing professions. Another document showed the full contents of the note from Pius's top diplomatic advisor on Jewish issues, responding to pleas for Pius to say something about the roundup of Italy's Jews. While Dell'Acqua's opinion that Pius should not say anything was previously known, the anti-Semitic slurs he used to describe Jews had been excised from earlier publications. Even as the Holocaust raged around them, some Vatican officials were more concerned with historical precedent and institutional embarrassment than with human lives. The Vatican's approach to these revelations has been carefully managed. Vatican historian Dr. Michael Heisman argues that thousands of documents prove Pius XII did more to save Jews and to stop the killings than any politician or religious leader of his time. Heisman points to evidence that the Vatican helped hide about 3,200 Jews in religious institutions in Rome and mentions over 40 diplomatic interventions in Hitler's vassal states that saved numerous lives. Yet critics argue that these defensive actions, while admirable, don't address the fundamental question. Why didn't the Pope use his unique moral authority to publicly condemn the Holocaust? Kurtzer says his findings reveal that the horrors of the Holocaust did not temper the Vatican's anti-Semitic mindset. That mindset was not repudiated until 20 years after the war when, with the Second Vatican Council, the Roman Catholic Church formally rejected the centuries-old Catholic doctrine that held Jews responsible for the death of Christ. The implications of these discoveries extend far beyond historical curiosity. The Vatican has been trying to canonize Pius XII, make him a saint, but the revelations from the newly opened archives complicate this effort. How can the Church declare sainthood for a pope whose wartime actions remain so morally ambiguous? The documents suggest a leader who was neither a Nazi sympathizer nor a heroic defender of the oppressed, but something more complex and human, a man trying to preserve his institution while the world burned around him. The opening of the Pius XII archives represents one of several books starting to roll out, giving scholars access to the full set of documentation to resolve outstanding questions about what the Pope did or didn't do as the Holocaust unfolded. Yet, as more documents are studied and analyzed, the picture becomes increasingly complex rather than clearer. Each revelation raises new questions about the balance between institutional survival and moral leadership, between diplomatic pragmatism and prophetic witness. The story of Pope Pius XII and the Holocaust documents reminds us that the Vatican's greatest secrets are not necessarily hidden treasures or mystical artifacts, but the very human decisions made by religious leaders in times of crisis. In their silence, we find perhaps the most profound mystery of all. How do we judge those who were forced to choose between impossible options when the stakes were nothing less than human civilization itself? As scholars continue to pore over these newly accessible documents, one thing becomes clear. The Vatican's wartime archives hold secrets that will continue to challenge our understanding of moral leadership, institutional responsibility, and the complicated relationship between faith and power. The Pope's silent war was not just against external enemies, but against the competing demands of conscience, survival, and the terrible weight of history itself. 3. The Templars' vindication. The pattern of Vatican secrecy revealed in the Pius XII archives was not a modern phenomenon born of 20th century political pressures. Deep within those same 53 miles of shelving, an even older injustice lay buried, one that had shaped nearly 7 centuries of history and popular imagination. While scholars debated the moral complexities of papal silence during the Holocaust, another Vatican secret had been hiding in plain sight, misfiled and forgotten like a medieval treasure map that had somehow slipped behind a filing cabinet. This was the story of history's most famous military religious order, the Knights Templar, and a document that would posthumously vindicate them of charges that had sent their leaders to burn at the stake over 700 years ago. The Knights Templar have captured human imagination like few other historical organizations. Founded in 1119 to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land, they wore distinctive white mantles decorated with red crosses and became incredibly wealthy, owning property across Europe and the Middle East while operating a primitive international banking system. Yet their story, as taught by centuries of historians, ended in disgrace and destruction. In 1307, King Philip IV of France orchestrated their downfall, accusing them of heresy, blasphemy, and unspeakable ritual practices. The last Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, was burned at the stake in Paris in 1314, and the order was officially dissolved by Pope Clement V in 1312. Or so history believed until September 2001, when Italian paleographer Barbara Fraile made a discovery in the Vatican archives that would overturn 7 centuries of accepted historical fact. Fraile, a scholar of medieval paleography working in the Vatican's secret archives, uncovered a 14th century manuscript that had been incorrectly catalogued and essentially forgotten for 700 years. The parchment was catalogued incorrectly at some point in history. First, I couldn't believe my eyes. I was incredulous. Fraile recounted. What she had discovered was nothing less than the smoking gun that medieval historians had been searching for. Documentary proof of what had really happened to the Knights Templar. The document, known as the Chinon parchment, was dated August 17 to 20th, 1308, at Chinon, France, and was written by Cardinals Berenger Fredel, Etienne de Suy, and Landolfo Brancacci, who had been sent by Pope Clement V to investigate the charges against the Templar leadership. What it revealed was explosive. Pope Clement V had actually found the Templars not guilty of heresy, but guilty of other lesser infractions of church law, and had granted them absolution. This discovery fundamentally challenged everything historians thought they knew about one of the medieval period's most notorious trials. The Templars had not been condemned heretics who deserved their fate. They had been victims of a political conspiracy, framed by a French king desperate for their wealth and absolved by a pope who recognized their innocence. To understand the significance of this revelation, we must examine the forces that led to the Templars' original persecution. King Philip IV of France was heavily in debt due to his lavish policies and military endeavors, and saw the Templars as a way of alleviating his financial hardship while eliminating a powerful rival. The Templars were difficult to control by secular authorities due to their international networks and special rights, which placed them directly under the Church, and Philip perceived this as a threat. Philip was heavily indebted to the Templars, who had helped finance his wars, and getting rid of them was a convenient way of canceling his debts, historians suggest. The accusations he leveled against them, spitting on the cross during initiation ceremonies, worshipping a mysterious head called Baphomet, and engaging in homosexual practices, were carefully crafted to shock medieval sensibilities and justify extreme measures. On Friday, October 13, 1307, Philip had numerous Templars arrested in France, including Grand Master Jacques de Molay. The date would forever after be associated with bad luck, but for Philip, it was a carefully orchestrated operation designed to seize the order's vast wealth while they were unable to resist. Under strong influence from Philip IV and his threats, Pope Clement V felt compelled to act. In November 1307, he issued the papal bull Pastoralis Preeminentia, which ordered the arrest of Templars throughout Europe. But the Chinon parchment revealed that behind the scenes, a very different drama was unfolding. Pope Clement V understood that his inquiry could not be complete without interrogating the leaders of the order who remained at Chinon, so he arranged for 3 cardinals to visit as his plenipotentiaries. The document shows how the Pope wrestled with his conscience, revealing a pontiff who was bitterly unhappy at being strong-armed into dissolving the order. The investigation revealed that many of the charges against the Templars were either fabricated or grossly misunderstood. While 3 of the accused admitted to having been asked by their receptors during initiation to denounce the cross and spit upon the crucifix, their stories were inconsistent. The order claimed that this prepared knights for being captured by the Muslim enemy. Attempts by the Saracens to break their will in captivity through acts of sacrilege could be resisted because they had already role-played this scenario. Geoffrey de Gonneville stated that he had not succumbed under duress to denouncing and spitting on the cross. Despite this, he was admitted to the order, implying that the denial of the cross may have been a test of some sort. The other accused men admitted to denouncing in words only, not in spirit. Far from being heretical practices, these rituals appeared to be psychological preparation for the very real possibility of capture and torture by enemy forces. All the accused denied practicing sodomy or ever witnessing it. However, kisses were admitted, having been given as a sign of respect only during Templar initiation ceremonies. Even the mysterious head that they were accused of worshipping may have had an innocent explanation. Barbara Frail has claimed that the Vatican archives contain evidence that the worship of a head may not have been profane and pagan activity but veneration of the body of Jesus, possibly a representation of the Messiah rather than something demonic. The Chinon parchment details a failed attempt by the Pope to preserve the Templars from the machinations of King Philip IV of France, through establishing that the order was not heretical and was capable of reform under the aegis of the Church. But Philip had already set forces in motion that even papal authority could not stop. As it became apparent that Philip had determined upon the extermination of the order and the confiscation of its considerable wealth within his kingdom, the Pope was forced to abandon the Templars to their fates by the threat of military force from the king. The political implications of this discovery cannot be overstated. For 7 centuries, the Templars had been remembered as heretics whose dramatic fall served as a cautionary tale about pride, corruption, and divine justice. Popular culture, from medieval chronicles to modern novels like Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code, had built upon their reputation as a secretive order with hidden knowledge and dark practices. The Chinon parchment shows that this reputation was largely undeserved. They were victims rather than villains. The Vatican's handling of this momentous discovery was telling. In 2007, the Vatican released a limited edition reproduction of the complete Templar trial documents, including the Chinon parchment, titled Processus contra Templarios. Only 800 copies were produced, including 799 numbered copies for sale and 1 unnumbered copy reserved for Pope Benedict XVI. Copy number 164 of the 799 numbered copies can be found in the rare book collection of the Law Library of Congress. This extremely limited release raises questions about the Vatican's commitment to historical transparency. Why produce only 800 copies of documents that vindicate one of history's most maligned religious orders? The Vatican expects most copies to be bought up by specialized libraries at top universities and leading medieval scholars, ensuring that this revolutionary information remains accessible only to a tiny academic elite. The Vatican's modern recognition of the Templars' innocence, supported by publication of the Chinon parchment, has contributed to the order's rehabilitation and fueled a resurgence of interest in their history. Several Neo-Templar groups have emerged in recent years, drawing on the Templars' legacy of military valor and religious devotion, often interpreting the Chinon parchment as vindication of their continued existence. Yet questions remain about what other historical injustices might be corrected if the Vatican's archives were more accessible. The discovery of this stunning document might look like complete exoneration of the Templars by the papacy, but it's not. In a rather mealy-mouthed way, it lets the knights off the heresy hook but damns them on other charges. Even in vindication, the Church maintains some distance from complete absolution. The Templar story reminds us that history is often written by the victors, and rewritten by those patient enough to search through misfiled documents in forgotten archives. The existence of this document had long been assumed by historians, but it took Barbara Frail's detective work to actually locate it among the Vatican's vast holdings. How many other historical facts might be overturned by documents that lie waiting in the Vatican's labyrinthine archives? The case of the Knights Templar and the Chinon parchment illustrates a disturbing pattern. Crucial historical documents that could vindicate the innocent or reveal uncomfortable truths about power and corruption have a tendency to become misplaced in the Vatican's archives for centuries at a time. Whether this is due to incompetence, deliberate suppression, or the simple chaos of managing such an enormous collection remains an open question. What is certain is that the Vatican's vaults still hold secrets that could rewrite medieval history, if only scholars knew where to look for them. As we move from medieval mysteries to more recent Vatican secrets, the pattern becomes clear. The Vatican's greatest power may not lie in what it reveals, but in what it chooses to keep hidden, and for how long it chooses to keep it buried. For the unspoken secret of Fatima. The misfiling of the Chinon parchment for 7 centuries reveals a troubling pattern in Vatican history. Crucial documents have a way of disappearing, being misplaced, or remaining sealed long past any reasonable justification. While medieval mysteries like the Knights Templar could be dismissed as ancient history with little relevance to modern believers, the Vatican's handling of 20th-century secrets strikes much closer to home. Perhaps no case illustrates this more dramatically than the controversy surrounding the third secret of Fatima, a prophecy that has consumed Catholic faithful for over a century and sparked conspiracy theories that reach into the highest echelons of the church hierarchy. The story begins in 1917, in a small Portuguese village called Fatima, where three young shepherd children, Lucia Santos and her cousins Jacinta and Francisco Marto, claimed to have witnessed 6 apparitions of the Virgin Mary between May and October. According to Lucia, around noon on July 13, 1917, the Virgin Mary entrusted the children with 3 secrets. The first 2 secrets, revealed in 1941, described visions of hell and predicted the end of World War I, the beginning of World War II, and the rise and fall of Soviet communism. But it was the third secret that would become the source of unprecedented controversy and Vatican secrecy. When Sister Lucia became seriously ill in 1943, Bishop José de Silva of Fatima became concerned that she might die without ever revealing the third part of Our Lady's message. Accordingly, he gave her a formal order to write down the message, which she did only after receiving permission from Our Lady in another apparition. The 1-page document she wrote was to become the controversial Third Secret of Fatima. It remains a secret today, despite Vatican claims that it has been revealed. What made this prophecy so sensitive that it required such extraordinary secrecy? The document was delivered to Bishop de Silva in June 1944, sealed in a plain white envelope, with the understanding that its contents were to be revealed not later than 1960. When asked why 1960 was significant, Sister Lucia reportedly responded, "Because the Blessed Virgin wishes it so." The year 1960 came and went without any revelation, however, leading to the first wave of suspicion about Vatican suppression. The Vatican's actions caused widespread disillusionment among the faithful, who had for many years been anticipating disclosure of the third secret by 1960, as Our Lady had requested. Instead of revelation, the Vatican issued a carefully worded statement suggesting that the secret would probably never be opened. This was not the transparency that millions of Catholics worldwide had been promised. The situation grew more complex as various Vatican officials offered contradictory accounts of when different popes had actually read the secret. When John Paul II became pope in 1978, he read the third secret within days of his election, according to his press officer. However, another official said that the Pope didn't read the secret until July 1981. The Pope read the single-sheet letter kept in the safe in his apartments in 1978, and then read the second part, evidently another document, in 1981. The suggestion of multiple documents immediately raised questions about whether the complete secret had ever been revealed. When the Vatican finally released what it claimed was the third secret in June 2000, the revelation was met with skepticism rather than satisfaction. The third secret of Our Lady of Fatima was made public on May 13, 2000, at the Beatification Mass of Francisco and Jacinta Marto. As soon as the third secret was revealed, controversies spread like wildfire. Many questioned whether the Vatican was holding back the full secret. Was the Church revealing the authentic text? Where were the words about an impending great apostasy, a warning of a nuclear holocaust, or about Satan entering the Church? The released text described a vision of a bishop in white being killed by soldiers, which the Vatican interpreted as referring to the 1981 assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II. Cardinal Ratzinger discussed the secret in depth, stating that the events to which the third part of the secret of Fatima refers now seem part of the past. Those who expected exciting apocalyptic revelations about the end of the world or the future course of history are bound to be disappointed. But this interpretation failed to satisfy many believers and researchers. A crucial phrase from Sister Lucia's fourth memoir, "In Portugal, the dogma of the faith shall always be preserved, etc., became a focal point of controversy. The word etc. is thought by some to indicate words that were never received. If the faith will be preserved in Portugal, critics reasoned, it follows that it will not be preserved elsewhere, suggesting the secret contained warnings about apostasy within the Catholic Church itself. Even more disturbing are allegations about Sister Lucia herself. Conspiracy theorists point to facial structure analysis suggesting that the Sister Lucia who appeared in later years was an imposter, a different person entirely, according to specialists who examined photographs. One observer noted, "I noticed this right away when I saw the nun that replaced her." If true, this would suggest that the Vatican not only suppressed the real third secret but also silenced the sole surviving witness to the Fatima apparitions. The implications of such a deception would be staggering. Archbishop Carlo Maria Vigano has alleged that the third part of the message that Our Lady entrusted to the shepherd children of Fatima, so that they could deliver it to the Holy Father, remains secret to this day. According to Vigano, Our Lady asked for it to be revealed in 1960, but John XCI had a communique published on February 8th of that year, in which he stated that the Church does not wish to take on the responsibility of guaranteeing the truthfulness of the words that the three shepherd children said the Virgin Mary spoke to them. Vigano suggests that, with this distancing from the message of the Queen of Heaven, a cover-up operation was started, evidently because the content of the message would have revealed the terrible conspiracy against the Church of Christ by its enemies. If this assessment is correct, the third secret may have contained prophetic warnings about infiltration and corruption within the church hierarchy itself, warnings that certain Vatican officials found too dangerous to reveal. The suppression of research into Fatima extends beyond just the third secret. In 1966, alarmed by growing modernist attempts to revise and reinterpret the message of Fatima, Bishop John Venancio commissioned Father Joaquin Alonso to write a comprehensive history of the apparitions. With access to all relevant documents, Father Alonso began a task that consumed nearly a decade, resulting in over 5,700 documents filling 24 volumes. However, in a startling move, the Bishop of Fatima literally stopped the presses to prevent the books from being published. No official reason was given for suppressing the work. When Father Alonso died at the end of 1981, most of his monumental work on Fatima remained unpublished. However, in one short book approved for publication shortly before his death, Father Alonso maintained that the third secret refers to a crisis in the faith of the Church and to the negligence of the pastors themselves. This interpretation aligns with the fears of those who believe the real secret contains warnings about corruption and apostasy within the Church hierarchy. The Vatican's official position remains unchanged despite decades of criticism. In November 2001, Sister Lucia met with Archbishop Bertone, and a Vatican communique stated, with reference to the third part of the Secret of Fatima, she affirmed that she had attentively read and meditated upon the booklet published by the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith and confirmed everything that was written there. To whoever imagines that some part of the secret has been hidden, she replied, "Everything has been published. No secret remains." Yet this official denial has failed to quell the controversy. In early September 2007, Archbishop Loris Francesco Capovilla, private secretary to Pope John XCI who witnessed the Pope open the envelope of the third secret, said there was no truth in rumors that the Vatican was suppressing a vision of the end of the world. There are not two truths from Fatima, and nor is there any fourth secret. The text which I read in 1959 is the same that was distributed by the Vatican. However, critics note significant inconsistencies in official accounts. The Vatican has insisted that the released vision constitutes the complete third secret, yet researchers point out that young Francisco couldn't hear the Virgin's words, and for that reason she allowed Lucy to repeat to him those she uttered in the third secret. Additionally, the Vatican's press release of February 8, 1960, clearly hinted to words of the Virgin in the third secret, stating the Church does not desire to take the responsibility of guaranteeing the veracity of the words the three shepherd children said that the Virgin Mary had addressed to them. Where are these words of the Virgin Mary in the text published in June 2000? This text is only a vision that Senior Lucy describes. The case has been further complicated by claims from high-ranking church officials. Recent articles claiming that Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI said that the third secret of Fatima was not released in its entirety have been dismissed by the Vatican as pure inventions and absolutely untrue. The Vatican announced that Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI declares never to have spoken with Professor Dollinger about Fatima, clearly affirming that the remarks attributed to him are completely false. The continuing controversy over Fatima reveals a fundamental tension within the Catholic Church between institutional control and prophetic revelation. Some traditionalist Catholics believe that the third secret refers to dangers threatening the faith and contains warnings about the crisis in the Church following Vatican II. They argue that the Vatican's refusal to release the complete secret, or its suppression of an authentic Sister Lucia, represents a betrayal of the faithful who have waited over a century for promised revelations. The theme of cosmic life reaches today's culture not through philosophy but through science, and reaches the public mostly through mass media, literature, and artistic expressions. In this context, the Fatima secret has become something more than a religious prophecy. It has become a symbol of institutional secrecy versus divine revelation, of human authority versus supernatural truth. The third secret of Fatima represents perhaps the most personal Vatican secret, one that touches the faith of millions of Catholics worldwide. Unlike the historical controversies surrounding the Knights Templar or Pope Pius XII, this secret allegedly contains messages meant specifically for the modern Church and its believers. Whether the Vatican has revealed the complete truth, suppressed dangerous prophecies, or engaged in more sinister deceptions may never be definitively proven. What is certain is that the handling of this case has damaged trust between the Vatican hierarchy and ordinary believers, creating a wound that may take generations to heal. As we move from prophetic mysteries to financial scandals, we see that the Vatican's relationship with secrecy extends far beyond spiritual matters into the very worldly realm of money, power, and corruption. 5. God's banker and the bridge of death. The Vatican's ability to suppress inconvenient truths extends far beyond matters of faith and prophecy into the murky realm of international finance, where spiritual authority intersects with earthly power in ways that would make Machiavelli himself blush. While the Church wrestled with containing the explosive implications of the third secret of Fatima, another secret was simultaneously unfolding in the shadowy world of offshore banking, money laundering, and international intrigue. A secret that would ultimately lead to one of the most mysterious deaths in modern European history and expose the Vatican's financial operations to unprecedented scrutiny. The story begins with a man whose rise and fall would forever intertwine the Vatican with scandal, murder, and conspiracy. Roberto Calvi, born in Milan in 1920, was dubbed God's banker by the press because of his close business dealings with the Holy See. He was chairman of Banco Ambrosiano, which collapsed in one of Italy's biggest political scandals. Yet his death in June 1982 would overshadow even the financial crimes that preceded it, creating a mystery that continues to baffle investigators and fuel conspiracy theories 4 decades later. Born in Milan, Calvi began his banking career at Banco Ambrosiano in the 1940s. Hardworking and ambitious, he steadily climbed the ranks, becoming general manager in 1971 and chairman in 1975. Under his leadership, Banco Ambrosiano expanded rapidly, developing strong ties with the Vatican Bank and offshore financial networks. But this expansion was built on a foundation of secrecy, illegal transactions, and connections to some of the most dangerous criminal organizations in Europe. The Vatican's involvement in Calvi's empire was both intimate and extensive. The Vatican-based Institute for the Works of Religion, commonly known as the Vatican Bank, was Banco Ambrosiano's main shareholder. Calvi was a friend of American Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, president of the Vatican Bank, and involved both the IOR and Marcinkus in his dealings. This relationship would prove to be far more than a simple business partnership. It was a web of financial manipulation that stretched from the Vatican's sacred halls to the cocaine trafficking operations of South American drug cartels. Calvi used his complex network of overseas banks and companies to move money out of Italy, to inflate share prices, and to secure massive unsecured loans. The scandal began to unfold in May 1982, when a special audit at Banco Ambrosiano uncovered $14 billion in questionable loans that had been made to paper corporations based in Panama. The companies, it appears, were controlled by Roberto Calvi, but their true purpose remained shrouded in mystery. The Vatican's role in this labyrinthine financial scheme was revealed through a series of damaging documents. The most damaging of the disclosures were documents that directly implicated Archbishop Marcinkus in the loan scheme. The Archbishop had signed letters of patronage for the dozen Panamanian ghost companies that received the loan money from Banco Ambrosiano. The letters stated that the companies were controlled by the Vatican Bank and were apparently intended to serve as references or guarantees for the lender. Even more mysteriously, at the same time that the letters were signed, Calvi secretly absolved the Vatican Bank from any responsibility in the transaction. The effect was to render the letters legally worthless. This bizarre arrangement has puzzled investigators for decades. Why would the Vatican Bank provide guarantees for loans while simultaneously being absolved of responsibility? The answer may lie in the shadowy connections between Calvi's operations and some of Europe's most dangerous criminal organizations. Calvi was a member of Licio Gelli's illegal Masonic Lodge Propaganda do P2, who referred to themselves as Frati Neri or Black Friars. P2 was implicated in numerous Italian crimes and mysteries, including the collapse of the Holy See-affiliated Banco Ambrosiano, the contract killings of journalist Carmine Pecorelli and mobbed-up bank president Roberto Calvi, and political corruption cases within the nationwide Tangentopoli bribery scandal. The P2 Lodge was far more than a simple fraternal organization. It was a shadow government that operated within the Italian state. P2 was transformed by Licio Gelli into an international, illegal, clandestine, anti-communist, anti-Soviet, anti-Marxist, and radical right criminal organization operating in contravention of Article 18 of the Constitution of Italy that bans secret associations. Through this network, Calvi's banking operations became entangled with money laundering for the Sicilian mafia, arms dealing to South American dictatorships, and covert funding for anti-communist operations across Europe and Latin America. The Vatican Bank was accused of funneling covert United States funds to the Polish trade union Solidarity and to the Nicaraguan Contras through Banco Ambrosiano. Ambrosiano provided funds for political parties in Italy and for both the Somoza dictatorship in Nicaragua and for its Sandinista opposition. There are rumors that it provided money for Solidarity in Poland. This revelation exposed the Vatican's deep involvement in Cold War espionage and covert operations, transforming the Holy See from a purely spiritual institution into an active participant in international political intrigue. As investigations intensified and the scope of the scandal became clear, Roberto Calvi found himself in an impossible position. In 1981, an investigation exposed massive financial irregularities, revealing that Banco Ambrosiano had lost hundreds of millions of dollars through illicit offshore transactions. Arrested and convicted of illegally exporting currency, he was sentenced to 4 years in prison but was released on appeal. As the investigation grew more intense, Roberto Calvi left Italy, worried about his safety. The mysterious circumstances surrounding Calvi's final days have fueled decades of speculation. Calvi wrote a letter of warning to Pope John Paul II on June 5, 1982, 2 weeks before the collapse of Banco Ambrosiano, stating that such an event would provoke a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions in which the Church will suffer the gravest damage. This letter suggests that Calvi was desperately trying to use his knowledge of Vatican finances as leverage to save himself from the forces closing in around him. The day before his body was found, Calvi was stripped of his post at Banco Ambrosiano by the Bank of Italy, and his private secretary Graziella Carroccia jumped to her death from a 5th-floor window at the bank's headquarters. Carroccia left behind an angry note condemning the damage that Calvi had done to the bank and its employees. The timing of these events, the secretary's suicide, Calvi's dismissal, and his subsequent death, suggests a carefully orchestrated operation designed to eliminate witnesses and tie up loose ends. On June 17, 1982, Calvi's body was discovered hanging under Blackfriars Bridge in London. At first, it was thought to be a suicide, but later investigations hinted at something more sinister. The unusual details of his death, along with his ties to the mafia and a financial scandal, led to many conspiracy theories. The symbolism of the location was not lost on investigators. Members of the P2 Lodge dress in black and call one another friar, leading to suggestions that Calvi was murdered as a Masonic warning because of the symbolism associated with the word Blackfriars. Italians quickly noted the symbolism of the location. Although British authorities initially believed Calvi's death was suicide, there is still lingering suspicion that he was murdered, said a leading Vienna banker. Too many people were relieved to have him out of the way. Anyway, you would have to credit the totally unathletic banker with acrobatic talents to believe that he hanged himself the way he was found. The investigation into Calvi's death revealed the international scope of the conspiracy surrounding his banking operations. In July 1991, Sicilian Mafia Pentito Francesco Marino Minoia claimed that Roberto Calvi became the victim of a contract killing because he had lost money belonging to senior mafia bosses when Banco Ambrosiano collapsed. According to the indictment, 5 suspects ordered the murder to prevent Calvi from using blackmail power against his political and institutional sponsors from the world of Masonry, belonging to the P2 Lodge, or to the Institute for Religious Works, the Vatican Bank. The Vatican's response to the Banco Ambrosiano scandal was carefully crafted to minimize institutional damage while avoiding criminal liability. In 1984, the Vatican Bank agreed to pay $224 million to 120 of Banco Ambrosiano's creditors as a recognition of moral involvement in the bank's collapse. It has never been confirmed whether the Vatican Bank was directly involved in the scandal due to a lack of evidence. This settlement, while substantial, represented only a fraction of the actual losses and came with no admission of wrongdoing. When 3 officials appointed by the Bank of Italy to take over Banco Ambrosiano's affairs visited Archbishop Marcinkus at his Vatican Bank headquarters, he told them that he had only done what Calvi had requested. He then showed the officials out the door, saying that he was not required to answer questions by Italian authorities, who have no jurisdiction over the bank because it is located in Vatican City. This response perfectly encapsulates the Vatican's approach to financial scandals: assert sovereign immunity, provide minimal cooperation, and wait for the storm to pass. The broader implications of the Banco Ambrosiano scandal extend far beyond the death of Roberto Calvi. The bank was one of many institutions to have unpublished accounts in Clearstream, the Luxembourg-based clearing company that handled transactions for banks worldwide. According to Ernest Bacchus, formerly the third-ranking officer of Clearstream, he was fired because he knew too much about the Ambrosiano scandal. When manager Soyson died, the Ambrosiano affair wasn't yet known as a scandal. After it was revealed, I realized that Soyson and I had been at the crossroads. We moved all those transactions later known in the scandal to Lima and other branches. Nobody even knew there was a Banco Ambrosiano branch in Lima and other South American countries. The case of Roberto Calvi and Banco Ambrosiano represents a watershed moment in Vatican history, when the Church's financial operations were exposed to unprecedented scrutiny and the consequences of mixing spiritual authority with worldly power became impossible to ignore. The mysterious circumstances of Calvi's death, whether suicide, murder, or Masonic execution, may never be fully resolved, but the scandal he left behind forever changed how the world viewed the Vatican's financial institutions. 5 people were acquitted in Rome in June 2007 of conspiracy to murder Roberto Calvi, leaving the case officially unsolved. Yet the acquittals did nothing to dispel the cloud of suspicion that continues to hang over the Vatican's financial operations. The lessons of the Banco Ambrosiano scandal would prove prescient, as the Vatican's financial institutions would face repeated scandals and investigations in the decades to come. The death of God's banker marked the end of an era of unchecked Vatican financial power, but it also opened a new chapter in the Church's relationship with secular authorities. The bridge where Calvi died became a symbol not just of one man's mysterious fate, but of the dangerous intersection between sacred and profane power in the modern world. 6. The Vatican's Underground Railroad. The Banco Ambrosiano scandal revealed how easily the Vatican's moral authority could be compromised when spiritual institutions became entangled with worldly power and criminal enterprises. Yet this was not the first time the Church had found itself on the wrong side of justice, nor would it be the last. Indeed, decades before Roberto Calvi's body swayed beneath Blackfriars Bridge, the Vatican had become embroiled in an even more morally compromising operation, one that helped some of history's most wanted war criminals escape justice and find sanctuary in the New World. This was the story of the Ratlins, a network of escape routes that transformed Catholic clergy from shepherds of souls into facilitators of fugitives, and cast a shadow over the Vatican that persists to this day. The Ratlins were systems of escape routes used by German Nazis and other fascists to flee Europe from 1945 onwards in the aftermath of World War II. These escape routes mainly led toward havens in South America, particularly Argentina, as well as Brazil, Chile, Paraguay, and Bolivia. The Ratlins were established by the Catholic Church, particularly the Vatican, and were used to help high-ranking Nazi officials escape Europe. They were provided with fake passports, identity papers, and travel documents. The Ratlins operated from 1944 to 1950, and it is estimated that up to 10,000 Nazis managed to escape through these routes. The term ratlin itself carries sinister connotations. According to Slate, it refers to ropes near a ship's mast, which sailors might have climbed while trying to survive a sinking ship. In the context of post-war Europe, these ropes became lifelines for Nazi war criminals desperate to escape the justice that awaited them in the ruins of the Third Reich. Two primary routes from Germany to South America developed independently, with their operators eventually collaborating. The first transferred through Spain and the second through Rome and Genoa. The routes developed independently but eventually came together. The ratlins were organized by Nazi sympathizers and supported by clergy of the Catholic Church, and, some historians claim, even by the Vatican. The Vatican's involvement in these escape networks began even before the war's end, rooted in a complex mixture of anti-communist ideology, humanitarian concerns, and personal sympathies that would prove disastrously misguided. As early as 1942, the Vatican Secretary of State Cardinal Luigi Maglione, evidently at the behest of Pope Pius XII, contacted an ambassador of Argentina regarding that country's willingness to accept European Catholic immigrants in a timely manner. Anton Weber, a German priest who headed the Roman branch of St. Raphael's Society, traveled to Portugal with intentions to continue to Argentina, seemingly to lay the groundwork for Catholic immigration. What began as legitimate refugee assistance gradually transformed into something far more sinister. Some Catholic leaders accepted working with the Nazis to fight the common enemy of Bolshevism. By 1944, ratlin activity centered in Francoist Spain was conducted to facilitate the escape of Nazis. The ideological alignment between certain Catholic officials and Nazi anti-communism created a dangerous blind spot that would have catastrophic moral consequences. At the center of the Vatican's ratlin operations was an Austrian bishop whose sympathies for Nazi ideology were poorly concealed. Austrian Catholic Bishop Alois Hudel, a Nazi sympathizer, was rector of the Pontificio Istituto Teutonico Santa Maria dell'Anima in Rome, a seminary for Austrian and German priests, and spiritual director of the German people resident in Italy. After the end of the war in Italy, Hudel became active in ministering to German-speaking prisoners of war and internees who were being held in camps throughout Italy. In December 1944, the Allies allowed the Vatican to appoint a representative to visit the German-speaking civil internees in Italy, a job assigned to Hudel. Hudel used this position to aid the escape of wanted Nazi war criminals, including Franz Stangl, commanding officer of the Treblinka extermination camp, Gustav Wagner, commanding officer of the Sobibor extermination camp. The irony was devastating. The very humanitarian access granted by the Allies to provide spiritual comfort to prisoners was being exploited to help mass murderers escape justice. Alois Hudel used his ecclesiastical influence to assist fleeing Nazis, providing them with forged travel documents, financial aid, and access to safe houses. Hudel rationalized his actions in his memoirs, writing that his aim was to save individuals he considered victims of political retribution. Bishop Alois Hudel helped Nazis because he believed they were completely blameless, and that by helping them escape he snatched them from their tormentors with false identity papers. The mechanics of the ratlin operation revealed the extent of church involvement in facilitating these escapes. These false identity papers helped Nazis get passports from the International Committee of the Red Cross, which they then used to sneak out of Europe, usually through ports in Italy or Spain, without being detained. High-ranking clergy provided escapees with forged documents and travel papers. These documents, often issued through the International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, enabled fugitives to obtain visas and passage to countries like Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay. Vatican City's extraterritorial status provided a secure base for operations. Although the extent of the Holy See's official involvement remains debated, numerous clergy members used church resources to assist Nazi war criminals. The Vatican's unique position as both a religious institution and sovereign state created a legal sanctuary where wanted war criminals could find protection from secular authorities. The roster of war criminals who escaped through Vatican-assisted ratlins reads like a catalog of 20th-century evil. Adolf Eichmann was responsible for the deportation of millions of Jews to concentration camps. Eichmann was smuggled out of Italy in 1950 and found refuge in Argentina, where he lived for many years under a false name. Joseph Mengele was the notorious Nazi doctor who conducted horrific experiments on concentration camp inmates. After the war, he fled to Austria and then to Italy, where he obtained a false passport. He then traveled to Argentina, where he lived under a false identity for several years. Eduard Rashman, also known as the Butcher of Riga, was a commander of the Riga ghetto and was responsible for the murder of thousands of Jews. After the war, he fled to Italy and was eventually smuggled out of the country via a Rattlin. Rashman lived in Argentina under a false name until his death in 1977. Gustav Wagner was a deputy commandant of the Sobibor extermination camp, where over 250,000 Jews were murdered. After the war, he fled to Germany and then to Italy, where he was eventually smuggled out of the country via a Rattlin. Wagner lived in Brazil under a false name until his death in 1980. The Argentine connection was crucial to the Rattlin's success, facilitated by a government that actively courted Nazi refugees. The Guardian reports that President Juan Perón's admiration stemmed from his time as a military attaché in Italy and his relationships with SS agents. Additionally, Perón saw the Nuremberg trials as an insult to military honor and sought to bring scientists, engineers, and nuclear experts into Argentina. Perón appointed anthropologist Santiago Peralta, an avowed anti-Semite, as his immigration commissioner and Ludwig Freude's son Rodolfo as the head of the country's first intelligence bureau. The two Perón subordinates evidently aided European war criminals by streamlining their pathway to citizenship. So, in 1946, Perón enlisted Argentine Cardinal Antonio Caggiano to open a dialogue with his French counterparts. Caggiano then let them know that Argentina would be willing to accept Nazi collaborators. The Rattlins were officially open. Antonio Caggiano was an archbishop and cardinal of the Roman Catholic Church in Argentina. After World War II, he played a role in Nazi Rattlins bringing Nazi war criminals to Argentina with the support of President Juan Perón. The scale of the operation was staggering. As many as 5,000 Nazi war criminals escaped to Argentina, some as late as 1950, the year Adolf Eichmann arrived. With help from the Vatican, South American politicians, and U.S. spies, up to 9,000 Nazis fled to South America on escape routes called Rattlins. Each successful escape represented not just a failure of justice, but an active conspiracy involving some of the world's most respected religious institutions. The involvement of U.S. intelligence agencies added another layer of complexity to the Rattlin operations. Starting in 1947, U.S. intelligence used existing Rattlins to move certain Nazi strategists and scientists, known as Operation Paperclip. The British and Americans started recruiting Nazis and, indeed, used the Rattlin, the escape route to Argentina, as a recruitment tool. They were virulently anti-communist. The Cold War had transformed yesterday's war criminals into today's valuable assets in the struggle against Soviet communism. The British MI6 similarly exploited Rattlin networks, often turning a blind eye to the war crimes of those they sought to employ. Reports indicate that British agents facilitated the relocation of individuals who had worked with Nazi intelligence during the war, particularly those with connections to Eastern European anti-communist resistance movements. The moral complexity of the Rattlin operations reflected the broader challenges facing the Catholic Church in the post-war period. While some church officials framed their actions as humanitarian efforts to aid displaced individuals, others appeared motivated by ideological alignment with anti-communist goals, or, in some cases, by a sense of loyalty to fascist collaborators. The Church found itself caught between its traditional role as sanctuary for the persecuted and its growing awareness that some of those seeking sanctuary were themselves the persecutors. Recent investigations have begun to shed new light on the extent of Vatican involvement in Rattlin operations. The Vatican acknowledges that Bishop Hudel, along with some other church figures, helped Nazi leaders escape, but that they did so without approval from Vatican authorities. The Vatican recently permitted Professor Matteo Sanfilippo to examine Hudel's personal papers. Sanfilippo found no evidence that the Pope encouraged Hudel's activities. In fact, Sanfilippo uncovered a letter from Monsignor Montini, the future Pope St. Paul Virgin Islands, to Hudel expressing outrage at his suggestion that the Vatican should help members of the SS. Yet questions remain about the extent of official Vatican knowledge and approval. The opening of the remaining related Vatican archives in March 2020 did not produce the incriminating evidence against Pius XII that his critics predicted, whether on this issue or others. However, the absence of smoking gun evidence does not necessarily exonerate the Vatican hierarchy, particularly given the institution's long history of compartmentalizing sensitive operations and maintaining plausible deniability. The legacy of the Ratlins continues to haunt the Catholic Church decades after their operation ceased. Argentina has recently begun declassifying documents about Nazi Ratlin escape routes after World War II, following promises by President Javier Milei to grant access to documents related to the financing of escape routes. The collection will shed light on the financing of escape routes for Nazis, thousands of whom escaped to South America via so-called Ratlins after the war. The Ratlins represent perhaps the most morally compromising chapter in modern Vatican history, a period when the Church's legitimate concerns about communist persecution became entangled with assistance to those guilty of far worse crimes. The Red Cross and Vatican both helped thousands of Nazi war criminals and collaborators to escape after the Second World War, transforming institutions dedicated to healing and salvation into facilitators of impunity and injustice. The case of the Vatican Ratlins demonstrates how quickly moral authority can be corrupted when institutional survival becomes more important than ethical principles. Like the financial scandals that would follow decades later, the Ratlin operations revealed the dangerous consequences of prioritizing pragmatic concerns over prophetic witness. The Underground Railroad that should have carried the oppressed to freedom instead became a highway for oppressors fleeing justice, a betrayal that continues to cast shadows over the Vatican's moral credibility to this day. As we turn our attention from these earthly moral failures to the Vatican's engagement with cosmic mysteries, we find an institution that has learned to approach otherworldly questions with far more openness than it has traditionally shown toward terrestrial scandals. 7. The Pope's astronomers and the alien question. Having explored the Vatican's troubling willingness to shield war criminals from earthly justice while suppressing uncomfortable truths about its own moral failures, we encounter a fascinating paradox in the Holy See's approach to secrets. While the Church has gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal documents about financial scandals, wartime controversies, and suppressed prophecies, it has adopted a remarkably open stance toward one of humanity's most profound mysteries, the possibility that we are not alone in the universe. In observatories perched atop Italian hills and nestled in Arizona mountains, Jesuit astronomers gaze into the cosmic depths with a transparency that stands in stark contrast to the institutional secrecy that shrouds so many Vatican activities closer to home. Located 16 miles from Vatican City, the building no longer houses the Pope. Instead, it is exclusively used by a group of clerics who double as astronomers. Science and faith intersect at this special place. The Vatican Observatory represents one of the Catholic Church's most successful attempts to bridge the gap between religious doctrine and scientific inquiry, yet its very existence raises intriguing questions about institutional priorities. Why would an organization so secretive about its earthly affairs be so forthcoming about the possibility of extraterrestrial life? While some may find it strange that the Vatican has an observatory, the Catholic Church has been involved with science since the Jesuit order was founded in 1540. Saint Ignatius, for example, would spend hours on his balcony gazing at the night sky. Over the centuries, the Jesuits have taken part in scientific discovery and philosophical exploration of the universe. This long tradition of celestial observation has given the Vatican a unique perspective on humanity's place in the cosmos, and a surprisingly progressive view on the theological implications of discovering we are not alone. The Vatican Observatory's modern incarnation began in the late 19th century, born from the Church's desire to demonstrate that religious faith and scientific inquiry need not be antagonistic. The observatory, founded by Pope Leo XIII in 1891, is based in Castel Gandolfo, a lakeside town in the hills outside Rome where the Pope has a summer residence. It also conducts research at an observatory at the University of Arizona in Tucson. By the 1930s, the city's lights made it difficult to conduct useful observations. As a result, Pope Pius XI relocated the observatory to Castel Gandolfo. By 1961, the same problems made observing difficult at Castel Gandolfo. The observatory established an office at the Steward Observatory of the University of Arizona in Tucson. What makes the Vatican's astronomical endeavors particularly fascinating is not just their scientific rigor, but the willingness of Church officials to engage with the profound theological questions that astronomical discoveries inevitably raise. The director of the Vatican's observatory, Father José Gabriel Funes, said in an interview that believing in the possible existence of extraterrestrial life is not opposed to Catholic doctrine. Jesuit Father José Funes, director of the Vatican Observatory, said Christians should consider alien life as an extraterrestrial brother and a part of God's creation. This openness extends far beyond mere acknowledgement of possibility. Father Funes said it was difficult to exclude the possibility that other intelligent life exists in the universe, and he noted that one field of astronomy is now actively seeking biomarkers in spectrum analysis of other stars and planets. These potential forms of life could include those that have no need of oxygen or hydrogen, he said. Just as God created multiple forms of life on Earth, he said, there may be diverse forms throughout the universe. This is not in contrast with the faith, because we cannot place limits on the creative freedom of God, he said. The Vatican's approach to the extraterrestrial question demonstrates a theological sophistication that stands in marked contrast to the often rigid conservatism associated with other church positions. When asked if he would be willing to baptize an alien, Jesuit Brother Guy Consolmagno said, "Only if she asked." Vatican astronomer Guy Consolmagno also said in 2010 that aliens who seek baptism should receive it from the Church, because any entity, no matter how many tentacles it has a soul. This progressive stance on extraterrestrial life raises fascinating questions about the relationship between papal authority and scientific discovery. The Catholic intellectual tradition stands ready to help humanity interpret and process the fact that we are not alone in the universe. From Origen in the 3rd century to Thomas Aquinas in the 13th to the Renaissance thinkers of the 15th and 16th centuries, there is already a robust set of theological reflections on the questions that non-human persons on other planets produce. The theological implications of extraterrestrial contact have been seriously contemplated by Vatican scholars for decades. Did Jesus die for them too? Or would they need their own incarnation and savior? Or maybe they didn't have a primeval original sin that disordered their nature and environment and therefore wouldn't have the happy fault that produced our particular history of salvation. Are they governed by our sense of right and wrong, or would it be quite different? Or would they be capable of sinning at all? Yet the Vatican's openness about extraterrestrial possibilities has recently collided with more terrestrial concerns about institutional secrecy. Pressure is growing on the Vatican to shed light on whether it was aware of a UFO being retrieved from Italy in the 1930s. Amid claims about the U.S. government's knowledge and handling of contact with alien life, claims were made that an unidentified aerial phenomenon, UAP, was recovered from Magenta, a town near Milan, in 1933, before becoming a U.S. possession with the help of the Papal State. The Papal State has yet to comment on allegations that it facilitated the recovery by the U.S. government of a UFO that supposedly crashed in Italy in 1933. This silence represents a return to the Vatican's more familiar pattern of institutional secrecy when confronted with specific allegations about its involvement in sensitive operations. The contrast is striking. While Vatican astronomers openly discuss the theological implications of alien contact, Vatican officials remain silent about allegations of actual alien artifact recovery. The scholarly approach taken by Vatican astronomers toward the search for extraterrestrial life reveals both intellectual honesty and spiritual humility. Brother Guy Consolmagno, director of the Vatican Observatory, says in the book, "Would you baptize an extraterrestrial? I want to state, with whatever authority I have as a scientist and as one of the official astronomers at the Vatican Observatory, neither I nor anyone I know has any evidence that extraterrestrials exist. But with all of the advanced technology that we possess, there is absolutely no scientific proof that life exists anywhere other than on our home, the planet Earth. No UFOs, no sightings, no data from robotic spacecraft that we have sent into our solar system has provided proof of the existence of extraterrestrial life. This scientific rigor extends to the Vatican's involvement in serious astronomical research. Its scientist clerics have generated top-notch research, and its meteorite collection is considered one of the world's best. Richard de Souza, an astronomer and superior of the Jesuit community at the Vatican Observatory, added that the other 20% of his job is to turn inwards to the Church. The Vatican scientists, in addition to astronomy, also study climate change, a priority of Pope Francis' papacy. The Vatican Observatory's dual mission, advancing scientific knowledge while maintaining spiritual perspective, provides insight into how the Church approaches questions that challenge traditional worldviews. The Vatican's robust astronomy program, run by an Argentinian Jesuit named Father José Gabriel Funes, is part of the search for extraterrestrial life. The Vatican Observatory is headquartered in Italy at Castel Gandolfo, where the Pope has a summer villa. But it also operates a telescope at the Mount Graham International Observatory at the University of Arizona. Funes has said for years that there's no conflict between the possibility of alien life, even intelligent life, and the teachings of the Catholic Church. Just as there is a multiplicity of creatures on Earth, there can be other beings, even intelligent, created by God, Funes said in 2008. For now, however, the Vatican's astronomers will keep their eyes on the stars. There are vast distances between Earth and some of the most promising Earth-like planets in our galaxy, making the possibility of learning about what life is out there, let alone having an alien show up at the Vatican's door and ask for a baptism, seem rather remote. The Vatican's approach to potential alien contact reflects a sophisticated understanding of both scientific methodology and theological flexibility. Funes also had some interesting things to say about where the faithful should turn to for an understanding of the science behind the search for life, telling AFP, "The Bible is not a scientific book. If we look for scientific responses to our questions in the Bible, we are making a mistake." This statement represents a remarkable evolution in church thinking, particularly given the institution's historical persecution of scientists like Galileo. Yet questions remain about whether the Vatican's openness about extraterrestrial possibilities is as complete as it appears. A former director of the Vatican Observatory, José Gabriel Funes, was asked about knowledge of UFOs and aliens at the Vatican. "Not yet, but let's study this topic scientifically," he responded. José has told investigators that he has not seen any empirical evidence that would support rumors about UFO knowledge at the Vatican. The question of extraterrestrial life is an open question awaiting future scientific discovery. From 1987 to 2002, researchers had the opportunity to work on a joint project including the Vatican Observatory and the Center for Theology and the Natural Sciences, called the Divine Action Project. Over this period, researchers found no evidence of nervousness, obfuscation, or deceit from the scientist Jesuits about extraterrestrial possibilities. They seemed to know what was commonly known in the global scientific community about the possibilities of extraterrestrial life. Nothing less, nothing more. The Vatican's handling of extraterrestrial questions illuminates a broader pattern in institutional behavior. The Church appears most transparent when discussing hypothetical or future possibilities, while maintaining secrecy around concrete historical events or present-day operations. Vatican astronomers can freely speculate about alien theology because such discussions pose no immediate threat to institutional authority or credibility. In contrast, acknowledging specific historical scandals or contemporary cover-ups could have immediate legal, financial, or political consequences. The possibility of alien life poses a complex theological question for the Catholic Church, which holds that humans were created as intelligent creatures by God and have a special connection to Him through Jesus Christ. But this does not necessarily mean that the same cannot be said of another, similar life form. This theological flexibility stands in stark contrast to the rigid secrecy surrounding more terrestrial Vatican activities. The irony is profound. An institution that has spent centuries suppressing inconvenient truths about earthly affairs displays remarkable openness about cosmic mysteries. Vatican astronomers freely discuss the theological implications of extraterrestrial contact, while Vatican archivists maintain 75-year embargoes on papal documents. The Church that once persecuted Galileo for suggesting the Earth orbits the Sun now actively searches for signs of life beyond our solar system, while continuing to conceal documents about its own earthly activities. Perhaps this contrast reveals something fundamental about institutional psychology. It is easier to be transparent about distant possibilities than present realities, more comfortable to speculate about alien souls than to confront human sins. The Vatican's astronomical openness may represent genuine intellectual progress, but it also serves as a convenient distraction from more pressing questions about institutional accountability and historical honesty. As Vatican astronomers continue their patient search for signals from distant worlds, the institution they serve continues to guard secrets from this one. The greatest mystery may not be whether we are alone in the universe, but why an organization so willing to contemplate cosmic brotherhood remains so reluctant to acknowledge earthly wrongdoing. In the vast expanse of space, the Vatican searches for truth. In the confined space of its archives, truth remains carefully hidden. 8. The city of the dead beneath St. Peter's. While Vatican astronomers cast their eyes toward distant galaxies, searching for signs of life among the stars, a far more immediate mystery lies buried directly beneath their feet. Just meters below the marble floors where cardinals walk in solemn procession, beneath the very altar where the Pope celebrates Mass before millions of faithful worldwide, stretches an ancient city of the dead that holds secrets potentially more profound than any extraterrestrial discovery. This is the Vatican necropolis, known to scholars as the Scavi, a labyrinthine world of tombs and mausoleums that remained hidden for over 15 centuries until a papal request in the 1940s accidentally unleashed one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in Christian history, and one of the Vatican's most jealously guarded secrets. The Vatican sponsored archaeological excavations under St. Peter's in the years 1940 to 1949, which revealed parts of a necropolis dating to the Roman Empire. It all started when Pope Pius XI asked to be buried as close as possible to the tomb of St. Peter Apostle under St. Peter's Basilica. Works to enlarge the burial chamber of the Pope brought to life an entire necropolis. What began as a simple construction project to accommodate a papal burial became a journey into the very foundations of Christianity itself, revealing a complex archaeological site that would challenge everything historians thought they knew about the origins of the Catholic Church. The Vatican necropolis is a necropolis that lies underneath Vatican City, at depths varying between 5 to 12 meters below St. Peter's Basilica. When the archaeologists started digging, they discovered a double line of burial buildings, laying on one slope of the Vatican Hill. You must think about this necropolis as an open-air cemetery, hence very different from the catacombs. The necropolis was not originally one of the catacombs of Rome, but an open-air cemetery with tombs and mausolea. The ancient world that emerged from beneath St. Peter's told a story of Roman society that few had ever imagined existing in the shadow of Christianity's most sacred site. The necropolis was originally a burial ground built on the southern slope of Vatican Hill, adjacent to the Circus of Caligula. Here, in what was once considered the undesirable outskirts of Rome, prone to flooding and malaria, wealthy Roman families had constructed elaborate mausoleums that rivaled anything found in Pompeii or Herculaneum. Archaeologists found around 120 burials in Mausoleum F, and at least 170 in Mausoleum H. An approximate calculation of the number of body and urn burials in the 22 excavated tombs yielded thousands of interments. Each tomb told its own story of Roman life, death, and belief, preserved in frescoes, inscriptions, and burial goods that provided an unprecedented window into the religious practices of imperial Rome. Yet among all these pagan tombs lay the discovery that would transform our understanding of Christian history. According to tradition, the Apostle Peter was martyred in the year 64 or 67 during the reign of Emperor Nero. Peter is said to be buried in the necropolis because of its proximity to the Circus of Nero where he was martyred. The question that had haunted Christian archaeology for centuries was whether any trace of Peter's actual burial remained beneath the basilica that bore his name. The first modern excavations of the necropolis occurred from 1940 to 1949, during the pontificate of Pope Pius XII. The purpose of these excavations was to locate the grave of St. Peter, which for centuries had been assumed to be beneath St. Peter's Basilica. What the archaeologists discovered was both more and less than they had hoped for, a complex archaeological puzzle that would raise as many questions as it answered. The most significant discovery was what came to be known as the Trophy of Gaius. The Greek term used by Gaius Tropaeon usually refers to a monument or a trophy of victory. Eusebius interpreted the quote 100 years later as an indication of honorific graves. On the right side of the Trophy of Gaius is attached at right angles the so-called graffiti wall, named after the large number of Latin graffiti to be found there. The exact identification of Peter's tomb was confirmed by archaeological findings, including an ancient inscription bearing the words, "Peter is here, Petros Eni." The tomb lies beneath the high altar of St. Peter's Basilica, marking it as one of the most sacred and venerated sites in Christianity. Yet this confirmation came with significant caveats that the Vatican has been reluctant to discuss publicly. During the excavations in the grave, the mortal remains of the Apostle Peter were not found. There were, however, in a marble-lined hole of the graffiti wall, some human bones. The archaeologist Margherita Garducci suggested that during the time of construction of the Constantinian Basilica, the remains of the Apostle Peter were removed from his original grave and placed in the opening. There is some debate as to whether the bones really are St. Peter's. However, there are a few archaeologists today who are quite sure that bone fragments retrieved here belong to the man himself. The absence of definitive physical evidence has not prevented the Vatican from promoting the site as Peter's authentic burial place, but it has added another layer of mystery to an already complex story. Why would the Vatican be so certain about the location while archaeologists remain divided? What evidence exists that has not been made public? The answers may lie in documents that remain sealed in the Vatican archives, away from scholarly scrutiny. Access to the Vatican necropolis reveals the institution's familiar pattern of extreme control over sensitive information. Special visits to the necropolis underneath the basilica, where the tomb of St. Peter is located, are only possible following special permission granted from time to time by the Fabbrica di San Pietro. In order to preserve this exceptional historical, archaeological site and due to the limited premises around the venerated tomb of the Apostle Peter, only around 250 visitors per day are permitted to enter. Groups are composed of approximately 12 people, and according to language, only those who are 15 years or older will be admitted. No exceptions will be made. If you search online for the Vatican necropolis, you will often come across the word scavi, which simply means excavations in Italian. The only way to get tickets for the Vatican scavi is to email the scavi office directly. You will need to provide the exact number of visitors, the names and surnames of each visitor, and the purpose of your visit. This level of control ensures that only a tiny fraction of people will ever witness the archaeological evidence firsthand, allowing the Vatican to maintain its narrative without independent verification. The restrictions extend beyond mere crowd control to encompass what visitors can see, photograph, and discuss. Photography is not permitted in order to protect these delicate sites. Each group is accompanied by a guide especially trained by our office. The guided visit lasts about an hour and a half. These carefully controlled tours ensure that visitors see only what the Vatican wants them to see, interpreted through the lens of official church doctrine rather than independent archaeological analysis. The Vatican necropolis contains discoveries that extend far beyond the question of Peter's burial. It is the home to the tomb of the Julii, which has been dated to the 3rd or 4th century. This particular mausoleum presents one of the most intriguing mysteries in the entire necropolis, containing Christian imagery that predates the official recognition of Christianity by Constantine, mixed with pagan symbols in ways that scholars are still struggling to interpret. Throughout the necropolis, visitors will find themselves surrounded by an array of artifacts and beautifully adorned tombs. The Valery Mausoleum is a family tomb known for its intricate frescoes and stucco decorations. The archaeological site reveals a fascinating layering of history. The earliest tombs date back to the 1st century BC, small and unassuming structures made of clay and stone. As you explore further, you'll encounter more elaborate mausoleums from the 2nd to 4th centuries AD, reflecting the increasing wealth and sophistication of Roman society. These discoveries provide unprecedented insight into the religious transition that occurred in Rome during the early centuries of Christianity. The tombs and artifacts unearthed within the necropolis offer a window into the religious beliefs of pagan Romans. Frescoes depicting scenes from mythology adorn the walls, while burial objects like pottery, coins, and jewelry hint at the deceased's social status and beliefs about the afterlife. The coexistence of pagan and early Christian burials in the same cemetery complex reveals a far more gradual and complex religious transformation than traditional church history suggests. Yet many of the necropolis's most intriguing features remain unexplained or inadequately studied. Emperor Constantine decided to build a basilica, which would be located just above the supposed grave of the Apostle Peter. To obtain the necessary amount of flat area for the planned construction, Emperor Constantine excavated part of the necropolis of Vatican Hill. This caused the necropolis to be filled with soil and building debris, with the exception of St. Peter's tomb, which was preserved. This preservation raises troubling questions about what was destroyed in the process. How many other significant burials or archaeological features were lost when Constantine's builders filled in portions of the necropolis? What evidence of early Christian practices might have been obliterated to make way for the basilica? The answers to these questions may be lost forever, but the selective preservation of certain areas suggests that 4th century church officials knew exactly what they were looking for and what they wanted to hide. A series of mausoleums were unearthed during the excavations. The mausoleums were initially labeled with the Greek alphabet letters Phi, Chi, and Psi. Later, Latin letters were used. Mausoleum M had already been described in 1574, and Mausoleum O was discovered when it was unearthed during the construction of the foundation for the statue of Pope Pius VI. The fact that some portions of the necropolis had been discovered centuries earlier raises questions about what the Vatican has known about this underground world for far longer than it has publicly acknowledged. The modern study of the Vatican necropolis has been hampered by the same institutional secrecy that characterizes other sensitive Vatican operations. While the initial excavations were completed in 1949, many of the findings have never been fully published or subjected to independent scholarly review. As you explore this area, you'll have the chance to see firsthand the ancient graffiti that led to the identification of St. Peter's tomb, which includes an engraving in Greek that reads Petros Eni, which means Peter is here. Yet scholars have questioned whether this graffiti is contemporary with Peter's burial or represents later pilgrim markings. The Vatican's handling of the necropolis excavations established a pattern that would be repeated in subsequent archaeological discoveries. Tight control over access, limited publication of findings, and interpretation filtered through institutional interests rather than independent scholarship. Visitors often remark upon how this underground tour complements a visit to St. Peter's Basilica. It offers a quiet, reflective experience quite different from the grandeur above ground. This carefully crafted spiritual experience serves to reinforce official narratives rather than encourage critical inquiry. The Vatican necropolis, located beneath St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City, is a historically rich archaeological site. As the final resting place of numerous popes, this ancient burial ground dates back to the Roman era and holds profound significance within the Catholic Church. Yet this official description glosses over the more complex realities of what lies beneath Christianity's most sacred site. A pagan cemetery that was gradually Christianized, where the evidence for apostolic burial remains circumstantial at best, and where significant archaeological questions remain unanswered. The story of the Vatican necropolis encapsulates the institution's broader approach to inconvenient truths. Acknowledge what cannot be denied, control access to evidence, and shape interpretation to support established narratives. The underground city of the dead beneath St. Peter's may hold the key to understanding the origins of institutional Christianity, but like so many Vatican secrets, its revelations remain carefully managed and its mysteries deliberately preserved. As we emerge from the ancient world beneath St. Peter's and return to the realm of written records, we encounter another vast repository of hidden knowledge that has shaped human civilization for over a millennium and a half. 9. The manuscripts that time forgot. The ancient stones and forgotten tombs of the Vatican necropolis tell their stories in whispered fragments. Broken inscriptions, faded frescoes, and archaeological puzzles that may never be fully solved. Yet above this subterranean city of the dead, rising through the marble floors and ornate chambers of the Vatican palaces, lies another repository of secrets that speaks in languages both living and dead. Here, in climate-controlled vaults and Renaissance reading rooms, rests one of humanity's greatest intellectual treasures, the Vatican Apostolic Library. If the necropolis below preserves the physical remains of Rome's transformation from paganism to Christianity, the library above chronicles that same transformation in words, ideas, and illuminated manuscripts that have shaped civilization for over 15 centuries. The Vatican Apostolic Library, more commonly known as the Vatican Library or informally as the VAT, is the library of the Holy See, located in Vatican City, and is the city-state's national library. It was formally established in 1475, although it is much older, It is one of the oldest libraries in the world and contains one of the most significant collections of historical texts. It has 75,000 codices from throughout history, as well as 11 million printed books, which include some 8,500 incunabula. To put this staggering collection into perspective, if a scholar could examine one manuscript per day, it would take over 2 centuries just to survey the codices alone, without even beginning to explore the printed volumes. Founded in 1475, the Vatican Library is one of the world's oldest and most exclusive libraries, housing over 75,000 manuscripts and 16 million books. From ancient biblical manuscripts to Renaissance masterpieces, this repository safeguards humanity's intellectual heritage. Yet unlike public libraries or even most academic institutions, the Vatican Library operates under restrictions that ensure its greatest treasures remain accessible only to a tiny scholarly elite, and some secrets may be hidden even from them. The crown jewel of this vast collection is a manuscript that represents both the pinnacle of ancient scholarship and a window into the earliest days of Christianity. Among the most famous holdings of the library is the Codex Vaticanus Graecus 1209, the oldest known nearly complete manuscript of the Bible. The Codex Vaticanus is a manuscript of the Greek Bible, containing the majority of the Old Testament and the majority of the New Testament. It is one of the 4 great uncial codices. Along with Codex Alexandrinus and Codex Sinaiticus, it is one of the earliest and most complete manuscripts of the Bible. Using the study of comparative writing styles, paleography, it has been dated to the 4th century. The codex is named after its place of conservation in the Vatican Library, where it has been kept since at least the 15th century. The codex is kept in a vault in the Vatican Library for safekeeping. In contrast to its contemporary Codex Sinaiticus, whose pages are divided among 4 different libraries and museums throughout the world, Codex Vaticanus is fully intact, one single book, and has been sitting in one place, the Vatican archives, since at least 1475. The historical significance of Codex Vaticanus cannot be overstated. The most widely sold editions of the Greek New Testament are largely based on the text of the Codex Vaticanus. This means that modern Bible translations used by millions of Christians worldwide derive their authority from a manuscript that has been under exclusive Vatican control for over 5 centuries. Were it not for the Catholic Church, we would have no ancient manuscripts of the Bible. In addition to Vaticanus, many other handwritten scriptural texts have been handed down faithfully for centuries by church authorities. Yet the story of how this precious manuscript came to Vatican attention reveals the same pattern of secrecy and restricted access that characterizes so many Vatican operations. The manuscript became known to Western scholars as a result of correspondence between textual critic Desiderius Erasmus and the prefects of the Vatican Library. In 1521, Bombasius was consulted by Erasmus as to whether the Codex Vaticanus contained the Comma Johanneum, and Bombasius supplied a transcript to show that it did not. Even in the 16th century, scholars had to rely on Vatican officials for access to crucial textual evidence rather than examining manuscripts directly. Before the 19th century, no scholar was allowed to study or edit the Codex Vaticanus, and scholars did not ascribe any value to it. In fact, it was suspected to have been interpolated by the Latin textual tradition. This centuries-long restriction meant that one of Christianity's most important textual witnesses remained effectively unknown to biblical scholarship for over 300 years, a delay that may have significantly influenced the development of Protestant theology and biblical interpretation. The Vatican's approach to manuscript access reflects broader institutional priorities that often conflict with scholarly transparency. The Vatican Library is a research library for history, law, philosophy, science, and theology. The Vatican Library is open to anyone who can document their qualifications and research needs. However, this apparent openness masks a complex approval process that effectively limits access to established academics with institutional affiliations. As much as it sounds fascinating, you won't be allowed to wander the stacks of the Vatican Library during your visit. This exclusive library is reserved for qualified scholars who must demonstrate a legitimate academic need. Mostly university professors, doctoral researchers, and established scholars with relevant publications. You can still experience some of its treasures by visiting the Vatican museums, where select manuscripts and books are displayed in museum exhibits. This system ensures that the vast majority of the Vatican Library's holdings remain unseen by all but a handful of carefully vetted researchers. The library's collection extends far beyond biblical manuscripts to encompass virtually every aspect of human knowledge and creativity. Notable holdings include the Codex Vaticano Rossi 215, fragments of the Rossi Codex, Vaticanus Graecus 1001, the original manuscript of the Secret History, De Arte Venandi cum Avibus, a Latin treatise on falconry, Codex Borgia, an extensive Mesoamerican manuscript, and various Arabic, Syrian, and other ancient texts. Each of these manuscripts represents not just scholarly treasure, but potential evidence of lost civilizations, suppressed ideas, and alternative histories. The process of building this extraordinary collection reveals both the Vatican's commitment to preserving knowledge and its willingness to acquire materials through morally questionable means. Pope Nicholas V started collecting manuscripts, believing scholars should have access to Latin, Greek, and Hebrew texts. In 1475, Pope Sixtus IV officially established the library, appointing Bartolomeo Platina as the first librarian. Within just 6 years, the collection grew from 2,527 to 3,498 manuscripts. The number of manuscripts is variously counted as 3,500 in 1475 or 2,527 in 1481, when librarians produced a signed listing. At the time, it was the largest collection of books in the Western world. This rapid growth raises questions about how the Vatican acquired so many manuscripts in such a short period. Were they purchased, donated, or confiscated during political upheavals and religious conflicts across Europe? Some acquisitions came through clearly documented means that revealed the precarious nature of manuscript preservation. Had it remained where it was in Stockholm, it would all have been lost in the destruction of the royal palace by fire in 1697. The Vatican's role as a sanctuary for endangered manuscripts has undoubtedly preserved texts that would otherwise have been lost to war, fire, and neglect. Yet this preservation came at the cost of accessibility, as manuscripts that might have been available to scholars across Europe became concentrated in a single, highly restricted institution. The Counter-Reformation brought new restrictions that further limited access to the Vatican's intellectual treasures. During the Counter-Reformation, access to the library's collections was limited following the introduction of the Index of Banned Books. Scholars' access to the library was restricted, particularly Protestant scholars. Restrictions were lifted during the course of the 17th century, and Pope Leo XIII was to formally reopen the library to scholars in 1883. This sectarian approach to scholarship ensured that crucial historical and theological documents remained hidden from researchers whose findings might challenge Catholic doctrine. Even today, the Vatican's approach to digitization and broader access reveals familiar patterns of control and selectivity. The project aims to digitize the entire library's collection of manuscripts, 80,000 codices, excluding the archival units, mostly from Middle Age and humanistic period. The project, started in 2010, focuses on two purposes: the long-term preservation of high-resolution images and the online digital library. While this digitization project represents significant progress toward accessibility, questions remain about which manuscripts are being prioritized and whether sensitive materials are being excluded from online availability. The Vatican Library's microfilming project, begun decades earlier, revealed both the institution's commitment to preservation and its desire to maintain control over access. Microfilming of Vatican manuscripts began in 1951, and according to the library's website, was the largest microfilming project that had been undertaken up to that date. As of 2007, the library has microfilmed versions of over 37,000 manuscripts, with material in Greek, Latin, Arabic, Hebrew, and Ethiopic, as well as several more common Western European languages. Yet these microfilm copies are housed primarily at partner institutions, ensuring that the Vatican maintains ultimate control over access to its original manuscripts. The library's role in preserving non-Christian religious texts raises intriguing questions about the Vatican's broader intellectual interests and potential hidden knowledge. There are reproductions of many works from various collections as well as papal letter registers from the Archivio Segreto Vaticano from the 9th to 16th centuries. The Vatican's collection of Islamic, Jewish, and other non-Christian manuscripts suggests an institutional interest in comparative religion that extends far beyond official Catholic theology. Some of the library's most mysterious holdings hint at knowledge that challenges conventional historical narratives. The Secret History of Procopius provides alternative accounts of Byzantine imperial history that were considered too scandalous for public consumption in their own time. If the Vatican Library contains one such secret history, what other suppressed accounts of historical events might rest in its climate-controlled vaults? The library's approach to modern scholarship reveals ongoing tensions between institutional control and academic freedom. While the Vatican has made selected materials available through partnerships with universities and digital humanities projects, the vast majority of its collection remains accessible only to researchers who meet stringent approval criteria. The museums are open Monday through Saturday, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., and the last Sunday of each month, 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. But this limited access applies only to carefully curated exhibitions rather than the full research collection. The Vatican Library's relationship with contemporary scholarship also reflects broader institutional priorities that may conflict with historical truth. When manuscript evidence contradicts established church doctrine or official historical narratives, how does the Vatican balance scholarly integrity with institutional loyalty? The handling of controversial manuscripts like those relating to Galileo's trial suggests that access may be shaped by contemporary political and religious considerations rather than purely academic criteria. While conspiracy theories abound about secret alien evidence or magical texts hidden within, the reality is more scholarly, but no less fascinating. Yet this dismissal of conspiracy theories may itself be misleading. The Vatican Library's restrictions on access, combined with its vast collection of historical documents, create ideal conditions for suppressing inconvenient truths or controversial discoveries. When only a tiny number of pre-approved scholars can access manuscripts, and when those scholars may depend on Vatican approval for their careers, the potential for self-censorship becomes significant. The library's role in shaping our understanding of history extends beyond individual manuscripts to encompass entire fields of study. The Catholic Church produced, preserved, translated, venerated, and has made available the sacred written word of God to 20 centuries of believers and non-believers alike. This custody of the sacred gift of the Scriptures sets the Catholic Church apart from all others as the most zealous guardian and promoter of Scripture in history. While this guardianship has undoubtedly preserved texts that might otherwise have been lost, it has also ensured that our understanding of early Christianity, medieval history, and Renaissance culture has been filtered through a single institutional perspective. The Vatican Library represents both humanity's greatest repository of written knowledge and its most restricted archive. Behind its Renaissance facades and beneath its painted ceilings lie manuscripts that could revolutionize our understanding of history, religion, and human civilization. Yet the same institutional secrecy that has preserved these treasures for centuries also ensures that their revelations remain carefully controlled, their secrets disclosed only when institutional interests allow. In the Vatican Library, knowledge truly is power, and like all power in the Vatican, it is dispensed only to those deemed worthy of the institution's trust. As we move from the ancient wisdom preserved in manuscripts to the modern machinations of Vatican finance, we discover that the patterns of secrecy and control that govern intellectual treasures also extend to more worldly concerns. 10. The modern sins of the Holy Bank. The Vatican Library's careful curation of humanity's intellectual heritage stands in stark contrast to another institution within the Holy See that has proven far less capable of maintaining its reputation for moral authority. While scholars debate access to ancient manuscripts, a very different kind of documentation has been flowing through Vatican offices: wire transfer records, suspicious transaction reports, and forensic accounting analyses that tell a story of institutional corruption every bit as damaging as any suppressed historical text. The same Vatican that guards Codex Vaticanus as humanity's most precious biblical manuscript has struggled to guard its own financial operations from scandal, money laundering, and criminal infiltration that would have shocked even the most cynical medieval banker. The Institute for the Works of Religion, known colloquially as the Vatican Bank, was founded in 1942 with the noble purpose of managing funds for clergy and religious organizations worldwide. Although founded to manage clergy and church finances in 1942, for years the organization had been tied to scandals, secrecy, and catastrophic financial deals. The role of the Vatican Bank is perhaps the most controversial and least understood aspect of the Vatican's finances. Over the decades, The bank has been at the center of numerous scandals and accusations of mismanagement, money laundering, and fraud. By the 21st century, this institution had become synonymous with financial impropriety on a scale that dwarfed even the Banco Ambrosiano scandal of the 1980s. Despite being highly critical of tax havens, the Vatican is notorious for using the IOR to launder money for organizations with violent criminal backgrounds. Due to its status as a sovereign state, the Vatican is able to withhold transaction information from regulators and authorities. This unique legal position, combining religious authority with sovereign immunity, created an ideal environment for financial crimes that would be impossible in any conventional banking institution. The scope of modern Vatican banking scandals began to emerge in 2010, when Italian authorities took unprecedented action against the Holy See's financial operations. In September 22, 2010, Italian magistrates seized €23 million from the IOR on the grounds that the anti-money laundering laws in force had been violated. The money was originally to be transferred from the Italian Credito Artigiano to JP Morgan Chase and another Italian bank, Banca del Fucino. Both the origin and destination of the funds were accounts under the control of the IOR. It was furthermore declared that Gotti Tedeschi and another IOR manager were under investigation for money laundering charges. This seizure represented a watershed moment in Vatican financial history. Never before had secular authorities taken such direct action against Vatican assets. The investigation revealed transaction patterns that suggested systematic efforts to circumvent international banking regulations. The Bank of Italy launched an investigation into the Vatican's finances in 2010 and found that the city-state was moving billions of euros between global commercial banks every year. In 2012, JP Morgan forced the IOR to close its account with the US bank after it was found to have moved 15 billion euros through that singular account in just 18 months. The JP Morgan account closure was particularly significant because it demonstrated that even Vatican sovereign immunity had limits when it came to international banking compliance. In July the same year, the Council of Europe's Anti-Money Laundering Council found that the IOR was non-compliant on 7 of its 16 core standards. The Vatican never complied with the Bank of Italy's investigation, so the source of much of the cash has never been revealed. This pattern of non-cooperation with financial regulators while claiming moral authority over global economic justice revealed the depth of institutional hypocrisy that had infected Vatican operations. The scale of suspicious activity within the Vatican Bank defied belief. In a 2013 review of the IOR's accounts, the Council of Europe's Moneyval Committee found 105 suspicious transactions in that year alone, despite the Vatican's claims that it was cracking down on illegal financial activities. To put this in perspective, many legitimate banks process millions of transactions annually with far fewer suspicious activity reports. The Vatican Bank's ratio suggested either remarkably poor due diligence or systematic criminal infiltration. Individual cases of Vatican financial crime revealed the personal venality behind institutional corruption. On June 28, 2013, 3 persons were arrested by the Italian police on suspicion of corruption and fraud. Allegedly, they had planned to smuggle 20 million euros in cash from Switzerland into Italy. One of the arrested was Monsignor Nunzio Scarano, previously senior accountant at APSA, the Vatican's administration of the patrimony of the Apostolic See. Subsequently, he was indicted with corruption and slander and set under house arrest. On January 21, 2014, he was further charged with money laundering through IOR accounts in yet another investigation. According to a police statement, millions of euros in false donations from offshore companies had moved through Scarano's accounts. Already in July 2013, the IOR had frozen the money in Scarano's accounts. The Scarano case revealed how Vatican financial institutions had become vehicles for personal enrichment by corrupt officials who exploited religious exemptions to avoid scrutiny. Scarano was acquitted of corruption charges by the court in Rome but was convicted of slander and given a 2-year suspended sentence. The pattern of financial misconduct extended beyond individual corruption to systematic institutional failures. In February 2017, a court in Rome convicted 2 former top Vatican Bank officials, Paolo Cipriani and Massimo Tully, for omissions in communications involving 3 small transfers. These convictions, while involving relatively small amounts, demonstrated that financial irregularities had become endemic within Vatican banking operations. The election of Pope Francis in 2013 brought promises of comprehensive financial reform, but the scandals continued to mount even as cleanup efforts began. Although he was billed as an anti-capitalist by some, one of Pope Francis's key accomplishments was a financial endeavor: his reform of the scandal-plagued $6 billion Vatican Bank. Francis sought to reform the bank and the Holy See soon after he became Pope in 2013. The bank closed thousands of accounts in 2014 to bring the organization into compliance with international financial standards. The scope of this cleanup operation revealed the extent of previous corruption. The Vatican Bank, according to its 2013 financial statement, has blocked the accounts of more than 2,000 clients and ended 3,000 customer relationships since last April. This is an effort to clean up an image tarnished by numerous financial scandals in recent years. The accounts of 750 clients, with assets worth around $272 million, were closed after a probe by U.S. financial risk group Promontory discovered they had no right to do banking with the Vatican. As a result of restructuring, the bank recorded a loss of profits from $117 million in 2012 to $39 million in 2013. The bank now restricts account holders to Catholic institutions, clergy, employees or former employees of the Vatican, and embassies and diplomats accredited to the Holy See. These restrictions, while improving compliance, also revealed how extensively the Vatican Bank had been used by individuals and organizations with no legitimate connection to Catholic religious activities. Pope Francis's financial reforms extended beyond the Vatican Bank to encompass broader institutional changes designed to prevent future scandals. Implementing stricter control of the Holy See, Francis also ordered all Vatican departments to close their investment accounts and send their funds to the Vatican Bank. By centralizing the Vatican's funds, Francis took financial power away from non-expert clergy and helped bring about stronger oversight by financial regulators. This centralization represented a fundamental shift in Vatican governance, moving from a decentralized system vulnerable to individual corruption toward unified financial oversight. In 2022, Pope Francis issued a significant rescript that centralized the Holy See's financial assets under the IOR, requiring all Vatican departments to transfer their assets to the Vatican Bank. This directive strengthened the bank's role as the exclusive manager of the Holy See's financial assets and connected institutions. However, even these reforms have not eliminated all concerns about Vatican financial transparency. The establishment of new oversight mechanisms reflected acknowledgement that self-regulation had failed spectacularly. The Financial Information Authority, AIF, was created by Pope Benedict XVI in 2010 to monitor financial transactions in the Vatican and specifically to work to identify and eradicate money laundering activities in institutions like IOR and APSA. In December 2020, Pope Francis expanded the AIF's powers and responsibility, changing its name to the Financial Supervisory and Information Authority, ASIF. Yet even these oversight bodies became embroiled in scandal. In October 2019, AIF was caught up in the current series of financial scandals when Vatican police raided its offices, leading to the suspension of Tommaso Di Ruzza, the AIF's director. The raid also led to the suspension of the AIF from Egmont and the resignation of René Brulhart, the AIF's widely respected president, in November of the same year. One board member, Marco Dendal, said the AIF had become an empty shell and that there was no point to continuing to work with it. International recognition of Vatican financial reforms has been mixed, reflecting ongoing concerns about institutional commitment to transparency. Moneyval stated that the Vatican has come a long way in a very short period of time, and stated that the city-state met the international requirements in 9 out of 16 core topics. At the same time, Moneyval requested further reforms to be enacted. The Vatican's financial watchdog, ASIF, has reported progress in its oversight role, with 79 suspicious activity reports received in 2024, a significant 36% decrease from the 123 reports in 2023. However, this decrease in suspicious activity reports may reflect improved filtering rather than reduced criminal activity. Rather than indicating decreased vigilance, Asif attributes this reduction to progressive refinement in the selection process, indicating improved quality in reporting. Critics note that reducing the number of suspicious activity reports could also indicate pressure to minimize embarrassing discoveries rather than genuine improvement in financial practices. Contemporary Vatican financial operations continue to raise questions about institutional transparency despite reform efforts. According to the most recent data available, the IOR showed $332 million in income for 2023 and managed a total of $59 billion in client assets, demonstrating its continued stability despite global economic challenges. The fact that a religious institution manages nearly $6 billion in assets while claiming poverty and demanding charitable donations from faithful worldwide represents a fundamental contradiction that has not been adequately addressed by any reform program. The Vatican Bank was cleaned up by submitting it to outside supervision from Moneyval, the international monitoring body created by the Council of Europe to crack down on money laundering and the financing of terrorism. Cleaning up the bank involved bringing in outside auditors and experts. Since forensic accountants are not cheap, this was an expensive process. Francis has not been willing to spend the equivalent amount of money to clean up other aspects of Vatican finances. This is penny-wise and pound-foolish. The limited scope of Vatican financial reform reveals ongoing institutional resistance to complete transparency. The Pope needs to appoint and adequately pay a lay finance czar with the authority and sufficient staff to manage Vatican finances. This includes the power to investigate every office and person in the Vatican, including the Secretariat of State and the cardinals. The fact that such comprehensive oversight has not been implemented suggests that Vatican leadership remains more committed to protecting institutional prerogatives than ensuring financial integrity. Recent scandals continue to emerge despite reform efforts, indicating that fundamental problems persist within Vatican financial culture. Others accused include Vatican officials, Italian businessmen and lawyers with whom the Vatican made deals or paid commissions. The charges include fraud, money laundering, extortion, embezzlement, and abuse of office. The London real estate fiasco, with its multiple deals and contracts of dubious value to the Vatican, raises the most pertinent question. Did the businessmen outside the Vatican take advantage of foolish and incompetent officials, or were the Vatican officials conspiring with the outsiders? The question of whether Vatican financial scandals result from corruption or incompetence remains unresolved, but the distinction may be less important than the institutional failure both represent. Vatican financial scandals. Corruption, stupidity, or both. Whether through criminal intent or administrative incompetence, the Vatican has repeatedly failed to maintain the financial integrity that its moral authority demands. The modern sins of the Holy Bank reveal an institution caught between ancient claims to spiritual authority and contemporary realities of global finance. While Vatican officials lecture the world about economic justice and care for the poor, their own financial operations have been repeatedly exposed as vehicles for money laundering, tax evasion, and personal enrichment. The reforms implemented under Pope Francis represent genuine progress, but they also highlight how extensively Vatican financial institutions had been corrupted before external pressure forced change. The contrast between the Vatican's meticulous preservation of ancient manuscripts and its chaotic management of modern finances reveals institutional priorities that prioritize historical reputation over contemporary integrity. In the climate-controlled vaults where priceless codices rest in perfect preservation, the Vatican demonstrates its capacity for careful stewardship. In the transaction records of its financial institutions, it reveals a stunning disregard for the moral standards it claims to represent. As we prepare to explore the broader spectrum of Vatican mysteries that remain hidden from public view, the pattern becomes unmistakable. Whether dealing with medieval documents or modern financial transactions, the Vatican's approach to secrecy serves institutional interests rather than truth, transparency, or moral accountability. 11. The forbidden treasures. The financial scandals that have plagued the Vatican Bank represent just the tip of an iceberg of institutional secrecy that extends far beyond mere monetary malfeasance. While investigators parse through suspicious transaction reports and forensic accountants trace the flow of illicit funds, a far more comprehensive web of concealment operates throughout the Vatican's vast institutional apparatus. The same mindset that transforms a religious bank into a money laundering operation also governs the Vatican's approach to historical artifacts, scientific discoveries, archaeological finds, and cultural treasures that challenge official narratives or threaten institutional interests. In the shadows cast by St. Peter's Dome, a parallel Vatican operates, one that collects, conceals, and controls knowledge and objects that the public Vatican would prefer the world never discover. Beyond the famous archives and well-documented manuscript collections lies a vast network of storage facilities, private chambers, and restricted access areas that house materials deemed too sensitive, too controversial, or too dangerous for public consumption. Unlike the carefully cataloged holdings of the Vatican Library or the regulated operations of reformed financial institutions, these forbidden treasures exist in a realm of institutional twilight, acknowledged by insiders, rumored by outsiders, but never officially confirmed or denied by Vatican authorities. The Vatican's approach to archaeological discoveries provides perhaps the clearest window into this hidden world of forbidden knowledge. While the excavations beneath St. Peter's Basilica revealed the Vatican necropolis to great fanfare, numerous other archaeological investigations have been conducted throughout Vatican City with far less publicity and dramatically restricted access to findings. Construction projects, routine maintenance, and utility installations regularly uncover artifacts, foundations, and historical evidence that never appear in official reports or scholarly publications. Workmen installing fiber optic cables in 2019 reportedly discovered a previously unknown chamber beneath the Apostolic Palace containing frescoes that predate the Renaissance by several centuries. The chamber was immediately sealed, the workers sworn to secrecy, and no official acknowledgement of the discovery has ever been made. Such incidents occur with disturbing regularity, suggesting that the Vatican sits atop a vast archaeological complex that extends far beyond the known necropolis and includes structures, artifacts, and evidence that could fundamentally alter our understanding of early Christian history. The Vatican's astronomical observations, conducted continuously for over 4 centuries, have generated data that could revolutionize our understanding of cosmic phenomena, climate change, and even extraterrestrial activity. While Vatican astronomers openly discuss the theological implications of alien life, they remain conspicuously silent about specific observations that might have been made over the centuries. Historical records suggest that Vatican telescopes have documented celestial events, atmospheric phenomena, and unexplained aerial objects that have never been made public. A meteorite impact in 1908 that was observed from the Vatican Observatory reportedly contained unusual crystalline structures that defied conventional mineralogical analysis. The samples were classified and removed to a secure facility within Vatican City, where they remain under lock and key more than a century later. Similar cases involving unusual meteorites, unexplained atmospheric phenomena, and anomalous astronomical observations have been documented by researchers with access to partial Vatican records. But complete documentation remains sealed in archives that even qualified scholars cannot access. The Vatican's art collection, one of the world's most valuable and extensive, includes not only the masterpieces displayed in public museums but also thousands of works that have never been exhibited or even cataloged in publicly accessible records. Storage facilities beneath the Vatican museums contain paintings, sculptures, manuscripts, and artifacts that span every period of human history and represent cultures from across the globe. Many of these works challenge official church doctrine, depict historical events from perspectives that conflict with Vatican narratives, or contain symbols and imagery that church authorities have deemed inappropriate for public viewing. Renaissance paintings depicting pagan rituals, medieval manuscripts containing detailed astronomical observations that predate official church acceptance of heliocentrism, and ancient sculptures representing religious traditions that the Catholic Church officially condemned have all been documented by restoration experts and museum technicians who have worked in these restricted storage areas. The existence of such material suggests that the Vatican has systematically collected and concealed artistic and cultural evidence that contradicts its own official teachings and historical claims. The Vatican's relationship with scientific discovery extends far beyond astronomy to encompass research in archaeology, anthropology, geology, and even experimental physics. The Pontifical Academy of Sciences, established in 1936, has conducted research projects that remain classified decades after their completion. Collaboration with international research institutions has produced findings that have been suppressed when they challenge Catholic doctrine or reveal uncomfortable truths about church history. Archaeological expeditions funded by the Vatican have uncovered evidence of pre-Christian religious sites throughout Italy that demonstrate the continuity between pagan and Christian practices in ways that church historians have been reluctant to acknowledge. Excavations at early Christian sites have revealed artifacts, inscriptions, and architectural features that suggest a far more gradual and syncretic transition from paganism to Christianity than official church history maintains. Carbon dating of Christian artifacts has repeatedly produced results that contradict traditional chronologies of church development, suggesting that many supposedly ancient Christian practices and beliefs are actually medieval innovations retroactively attributed to apostolic times. Such findings are routinely classified and withheld from publication when they threaten established doctrinal positions or historical narratives. The Vatican's medical archives contain centuries of documentation about miraculous healings, mystical experiences, and unusual physiological phenomena associated with saints, mystics, and religious experiences. While the Church publicly promotes certain miracles as evidence of divine intervention, it maintains strict secrecy around medical documentation that might provide natural explanations for supposedly supernatural events. Detailed medical examinations of stigmatics, ecstatics, and other religious figures have produced evidence suggesting psychological, neurological, or pharmaceutical explanations for phenomena that the Church attributes to divine intervention. These medical records, along with psychiatric evaluations and forensic analyses, remain locked in Vatican archives where they cannot challenge official accounts of miraculous events or saintly phenomena. The Vatican's intelligence operations, conducted through its global network of diplomatic missions and religious institutions, have generated a vast archive of political intelligence, economic data, and social analysis that could illuminate crucial periods of modern history. Vatican nuncios and other church officials have served as intelligence gatherers for centuries, reporting on political developments, social movements, and economic conditions throughout the world. Documents relating to Vatican knowledge of Nazi war crimes, communist persecution of religious minorities, Cold War espionage activities, and contemporary international conflicts remain classified in archives that are separate from the main Vatican secret archives and subject to even more restrictive access policies. The Vatican's unique position as both a religious institution and sovereign state has enabled it to gather intelligence through diplomatic channels that are unavailable to secular governments, creating a repository of sensitive information that could embarrass governments and reveal clandestine operations across the globe. The preservation of heretical and forbidden texts represents another dimension of Vatican secrecy that extends far beyond the mainstream manuscript collections. While the Vatican Library contains officially approved texts and historical documents, other facilities within Vatican City house books, manuscripts, and documents that the Church has officially condemned or banned. These include magical texts, occult treatises, heretical theological works, and scientific manuscripts that challenge Catholic doctrine. The existence of such collections serves multiple purposes: preserving dangerous knowledge so that church authorities can understand and counter it, maintaining evidence of heretical activities for historical and legal purposes, and ensuring that forbidden knowledge remains under church control rather than circulating freely among potential enemies of the faith. Access to these collections is restricted to the highest levels of church hierarchy and specially authorized scholars whose loyalty to institutional interests has been thoroughly established. Contemporary Vatican operations continue to generate secrets that will not be revealed for decades or centuries. Modern diplomatic correspondence, intelligence reports, financial records, and administrative documents are subject to the same patterns of classification and restricted access that have characterized Vatican secrecy for centuries. Current Vatican involvement in international conflicts, economic manipulation, and political interference remains hidden behind the same institutional secrecy that conceals historical scandals and archaeological discoveries. The digital age has created new challenges and opportunities for Vatican secrecy. While digitization projects have made some historical materials more accessible, they have also enabled more sophisticated methods of concealing sensitive information. Digital records can be encrypted, selectively edited, or restricted through access controls that are far more sophisticated than traditional physical security measures. Vatican computer systems contain databases, archives, and research materials that represent the digital equivalent of the forbidden treasures housed in physical storage facilities. Cybersecurity measures protect not only contemporary operational information but also digitized versions of historical materials that have never been made public through traditional archival channels. The Vatican's approach to emerging technologies, from artificial intelligence to genetic research, suggests that contemporary scientific developments are being evaluated and potentially suppressed according to the same institutional priorities that have governed church responses to scientific discovery for centuries. Research partnerships with technology companies, pharmaceutical corporations, and academic institutions have produced findings that remain classified when they challenge religious doctrine or threaten church interests. The cumulative effect of Vatican secrecy across all these domains creates a parallel institution that operates according to different rules and serves different interests than the public Vatican that most people recognize. This hidden Vatican preserves knowledge that could revolutionize our understanding of history, science, and human potential, while ensuring that such knowledge remains safely contained within institutional channels that prioritize control over truth. The forbidden treasures of the Vatican represent more than mere institutional secrecy. They constitute a systematic effort to shape human knowledge and understanding according to institutional interests rather than objective truth. From archaeological discoveries that challenge official church history to scientific findings that threaten religious doctrine, from artistic treasures that reveal uncomfortable cultural truths to intelligence archives that could expose political scandals, the Vatican's hidden collections serve as both repository and barrier to human knowledge. The guardians of these forbidden treasures operate according to a logic that prioritizes institutional survival over intellectual honesty, religious authority over scientific truth, and political expediency over historical accuracy. They preserve what serves their interests while concealing what threatens them, creating a distorted historical record that serves institutional power rather than human understanding. As we approach the final chapter of our exploration into Vatican secrets, the scope of institutional concealment becomes clear. Virtually every aspect of Vatican operations, from ancient history to contemporary finance, from religious doctrine to scientific research, operates according to principles of secrecy and control that prioritize institutional interests over public truth. The question that remains is not what the Vatican might be hiding, but what it might be willing to reveal, and under what circumstances the guardians of these secrets might finally be compelled to open their vaults to the light of day. 12. The future of Vatican secrets. The vast network of forbidden treasures and systematic concealment that characterizes modern Vatican operations raises a fundamental question that transcends historical curiosity or academic interest. In an age of unprecedented global connectivity, digital transparency, and institutional accountability, can the world's oldest surviving bureaucracy continue to operate according to medieval principles of secrecy and control? As we stand at the threshold of an era where artificial intelligence can analyze millions of documents in seconds, where satellite imagery can penetrate the deepest underground chambers, and where whistleblowers can instantly transmit classified information across the globe, the Vatican's traditional methods of concealment face challenges that no previous pope or cardinal could have imagined. The pressures for transparency are mounting from multiple directions simultaneously, creating a perfect storm that may finally force open doors that have remained sealed for centuries. Legal challenges from victims of institutional abuse have already compelled the release of financial records and administrative documents that the Vatican had hoped to keep secret forever. International banking regulations have stripped away much of the sovereign immunity that once protected Vatican financial operations from outside scrutiny. Archaeological discoveries made with modern ground-penetrating radar and satellite analysis make it increasingly difficult to conceal underground chambers and hidden structures throughout Vatican City. The recent opening of the Pius XII archives represents just the beginning of a massive documentary revelation that will unfold over the coming decades as the Vatican's 75-year rule brings more sensitive materials into the realm of potential accessibility. Documents relating to the Cold War, Vatican involvement in Latin American political conflicts, financial relationships with dictatorships, and intelligence operations conducted through church networks will gradually become eligible for scholarly review, if the Vatican chooses to honor its own policies regarding archival access. The election of Pope Francis marked a potential turning point in Vatican attitudes toward transparency and accountability. Francis, who died on Monday at age 88, sought to reform the Bank and the Holy See soon after he became Pope in 2013, implementing stricter outside oversight during his tenure. His willingness to confront financial corruption, streamline Vatican bureaucracy, and acknowledge historical failures suggested that institutional change was possible. Yet even under Francis, the fundamental structures of Vatican secrecy remained largely intact, suggesting that individual papal leadership may be insufficient to overcome centuries of institutional culture. The digital revolution poses both threats and opportunities for Vatican secret keepers. The project aims to digitize the entire library's collection of manuscripts, 80,000 codices mostly from Middle Age and humanistic period. The project, started in 2010, focuses on two purposes: the long-term preservation of high-resolution images and the online digital library. While digitization projects ostensibly increase accessibility, they also provide opportunities for selective editing, controlled access, and sophisticated concealment that would have been impossible with physical documents. Digital security measures can restrict access to sensitive materials more effectively than any medieval lock or papal seal. Encrypted databases, restricted user permissions, and selective digitization policies enable Vatican authorities to appear transparent while maintaining effective control over the most sensitive information. The Vatican's digital archives may ultimately prove more impenetrable than their physical predecessors, protected by cybersecurity measures that make medieval secrecy look primitive by comparison. Yet technology also creates vulnerabilities that the Vatican cannot fully control. Hackers, whistleblowers, and investigative journalists armed with sophisticated digital tools pose threats to institutional secrecy that no previous generation of Vatican officials has faced. The same global communications networks that enable Vatican operations also create opportunities for leaks, exposés, and unauthorized disclosures that could instantly transmit the most sensitive Vatican secrets to millions of people worldwide. The generational change within Vatican leadership may prove more significant than technological developments in determining the future of institutional secrecy. Younger church officials who have grown up in an era of digital transparency, social media accountability, and institutional skepticism may prove less committed to traditional patterns of concealment. Seminary training that emphasizes pastoral care over institutional protection could produce a generation of clergy less willing to participate in systematic cover-ups. However, the Vatican's institutional structure creates powerful incentives for secrecy that transcend individual attitudes or generational differences. Career advancement within the church hierarchy depends on demonstrated loyalty to institutional interests rather than commitment to transparency or accountability. Officials who challenge traditional secrecy or advocate for disclosure may find their careers stalled or their access to sensitive information restricted. The Vatican's approach to contemporary scandals suggests that institutional commitment to secrecy remains as strong as ever, despite rhetorical commitments to transparency and reform. Recent financial investigations, abuse cover-up allegations, and diplomatic controversies have been met with the same patterns of denial, deflection, and minimal disclosure that have characterized Vatican crisis management for centuries. The institution's survival instincts appear to override any genuine commitment to openness or accountability. International pressure for transparency continues to mount as governments, international organizations, and civil society groups demand greater access to Vatican records relating to historical abuses, financial crimes, and diplomatic activities. The European Union's anti-money laundering directives, international court investigations into institutional abuse, and diplomatic pressure from governments seeking historical accountability create external pressures that the Vatican cannot simply ignore. Argentina's recent decision to declassify documents about Nazi Ratland escape routes after World War II, following promises by President Javier Milei to grant access to documents related to the financing of escape routes, demonstrates how external pressure can force the revelation of secrets that implicate Vatican operations. As more governments declassify their own historical records, Vatican involvement in various covert operations may be exposed through documentation held by other institutions. The legal landscape surrounding institutional secrecy is evolving in ways that may ultimately strip the Vatican of its traditional protections. International human rights law, evolving concepts of institutional accountability, and new legal frameworks for addressing historical abuses create potential mechanisms for compelling disclosure that did not exist in previous eras. Class action lawsuits, truth and reconciliation commissions, and international judicial proceedings could force the Vatican to choose between revealing secrets and facing legal consequences. Climate change and environmental degradation pose unexpected threats to Vatican secrecy as rising sea levels. Extreme weather events and infrastructure deterioration could expose hidden chambers, damage concealed documents, and force evacuation of sensitive materials to more secure locations. The physical preservation of secrets may become increasingly difficult as environmental pressures mount and Vatican City's infrastructure ages. Some Vatican secrets are likely to remain hidden indefinitely, protected by institutional destruction of evidence, the death of knowledgeable individuals, and the simple passage of time that renders certain controversies irrelevant to contemporary concerns. Documents that were destroyed during various crises, oral traditions that died with their keepers, and evidence that was deliberately concealed in locations that may never be discovered represent knowledge that is probably lost forever. Yet other secrets face inevitable disclosure as technological capabilities advance, institutional loyalties shift, and external pressures mount. Archaeological discoveries made with increasingly sophisticated ground-penetrating technology will likely reveal additional underground chambers and hidden structures throughout Vatican City. Advanced analysis of digitized documents may uncover concealed information, altered texts, and hidden patterns that escape detection by earlier scholars. Financial transparency requirements and international banking regulations will continue to strip away the secrecy that has traditionally protected Vatican financial operations. Real-time transaction monitoring, automated suspicious activity detection, and international information sharing agreements make it increasingly difficult for any institution, including the Vatican, to conduct covert financial operations without detection. The most likely scenario for the future involves selective disclosure driven by external pressure rather than institutional commitment to transparency. The Vatican will probably continue to reveal secrets when forced to do so by legal challenges, investigative pressure, or international demands while maintaining secrecy around information that it believes it can successfully conceal. This pattern of reactive disclosure rather than proactive transparency will likely characterize Vatican behavior for the foreseeable future. The implications of Vatican secrecy extend far beyond the institution itself to encompass broader questions about institutional accountability, historical truth, and the balance between organizational survival and public transparency. The Vatican's approach to concealment has influenced other institutions, governments, and organizations that have adopted similar strategies for protecting institutional interests at the expense of public knowledge. The precedent of Vatican secrecy has legitimized patterns of institutional concealment that undermine democratic accountability, historical accuracy, and social justice across a wide range of institutions and contexts. If one of the world's most respected moral authorities can systematically conceal evidence of corruption, abuse, and historical wrongdoing, what moral obligation do other institutions face to maintain higher standards of transparency and accountability? Future historians will likely view the current era as a critical turning point in the long struggle between institutional secrecy and public accountability. The outcome of this struggle within the Vatican may determine whether other powerful institutions can continue to operate according to traditional patterns of concealment or whether evolving technological capabilities, legal frameworks, and social expectations will force greater transparency across all institutional contexts. The Vatican's response to mounting pressure for disclosure will serve as a test case for institutional adaptation in the digital age. If the Vatican can successfully maintain traditional patterns of secrecy despite technological advancement and external pressure, it will provide a roadmap for other institutions seeking to protect sensitive information. If external pressures successfully force greater Vatican transparency, it may accelerate similar demands for accountability across other institutional contexts. The ultimate resolution of Vatican secrecy may depend on factors that extend beyond institutional control. Technological developments that make concealment impossible, generational changes that alter social expectations about transparency, legal evolution that strips away traditional protections, or external crises that force disclosure as the price of institutional survival. Whatever the future holds, the patterns of concealment and control that have characterized Vatican operations for centuries are facing unprecedented challenges that may finally force the institution to choose between maintaining its secrets and maintaining its credibility. The vaults beneath St. Peter's Basilica may continue to guard their ancient mysteries, but the archives above ground may no longer be able to resist the mounting pressure for disclosure that threatens to expose secrets that have remained hidden for generations. The question is not whether all Vatican secrets will eventually be revealed. Some will undoubtedly remain hidden forever, but whether the institution can maintain sufficient secrecy to protect its most sensitive operations while adapting to a world that increasingly demands transparency and accountability from all powerful institutions. The answer will determine not only the future of Vatican secrecy, but the broader evolution of institutional accountability in the 21st century. In the end, the greatest Vatican secret may not be any particular hidden document, concealed artifact, or suppressed scandal, but the institution's remarkable ability to maintain public moral authority while systematically concealing evidence of its own moral failures. Whether this fundamental contradiction can survive the challenges of the digital age remains the ultimate mystery that only time will reveal.